What happened on a first date that made you decide, you know what, actually, I'm good? He used his pocket knife to cut me a slice of cake, and then later scraped some dirt clumps off his shoe with the same knife. I asked him if he ever cleaned his knife, and he replied, no, why? He also confessed he was madly in love with me the same day. We'd just met. One time I took this girl to dinner and she could not stop staring at our waiter. I'll grant her one thing. I'm a guy and I can admit this guy was probably hot for anyone who prefers men. Square-jawed and muscled college athlete type, I get it. But I did not appreciate the fact that she literally craned her neck every time the kitchen door swung open to see if he was walking out. Eventually, I gave her enough cash to pay for my part of the meal, told her I'd noticed, as though I couldn't have, suggested to her that she could get his contact info when she paid the bill, and then left. You wingmaned another bro on your own date? The next Bro Awards will feature you. He got us pulled over. The car was searched and he had a brick of some hardcore substances in the trunk. I almost got arrested. He finally vouched that this was a blind date and I was innocent. I mean, sounds like even if you wanted to, there couldn't have been a second date. He tried to change my order with the waitress because I didn't order what he'd recommended. Met a girl at a friend's party. We were both in our mid-20s, ended up spending 3 hours talking, and she was so funny, charming, gorgeous, and carefree. I asked her out and got a wonderful, I would love to, from her. I showed up about 4 days later at the restaurant she'd picked, one within walking distance of her place. She arrived 5 minutes later. Nice place, I say, as I get the chair out for her. Since it's so close, do you eat here often? She scowls and responds, you know, you ask too many fricking questions. I was floored. Everything continued downhill from there. Within about 20 minutes, she just got up and left. I felt as if she had failed to tell me the other night that she had an evil twin, and that's who showed up this evening. Later, when I ran into my buddy, I asked what the heck was up. Oh yeah, he said, she's a piece of work until she gets a few drinks in her. Then she's adorable. Thanks. Thanks a lot, buddy. I bet she's an alcoholic. She probably feels crummy as frick when she's sober. As a former alcoholic, this was my first thought too. Okay, well I was going to say that she was the opposite of most of us, who frequently turn into complete belligerent jerks when we drink, and say or do things we regret, but these last two commenters gave me some valuable insight. I hope she got to work on herself. Went to dinner with a girl who I'd been crushing on for quite some time. It seemed to be going well, and we ended up back at her place watching a movie or something. Out of nowhere, her boyfriend, of whose existence I was not aware, came back from out of town and stopped in unexpectedly. He and I had a super awkward conversation for a few minutes, and then the two of them disappeared into the other room for a minute or two. She came back and said something to the effect of, I don't have a place for you, I'm sorry. I just kind of got in my car and drove home with one of the strangest feelings I'd ever felt. At some point, a few minutes into the journey, I couldn't contain myself and busted out laughing. I met a girl on a dating app way back in the day, and we ended up playing pool with her sister. About an hour in, my date starts chatting up a guy at the pool hall that she apparently knew. They disappear for a bit, and the sister comes up to me and sticks her tongue in my mouth. I leave and go to tell my date this isn't going to work, and she's outside making out with the dude she was talking to. To this day, I don't know if the sister trying to make out with me was to cover for her. Ugh. The guy told me he'd still be together with his kid's mum if she had apologized for what she did wrong. Out of curiosity, I asked what she did wrong. I was expecting something like she cheated. You know, something that actually needed apologizing for. Nope. Apparently she kept nagging one day and wouldn't shut up, so he tied her to a computer chair and went out for 3 hours and left her. I said it doesn't sound like she was the one who needed to apologize, and then I left. 2 times. There was Farmer Dude, who added me on MySpace. I'm showing my age here. We chatted a while. I can appreciate a country boy. Seemed pleasant. Went to meet at McDonald's. Okay, sure, I'm not that hard to please, let's get some Big Macs and chat. We talked for about 10 minutes and clearly it wasn't going to work. He was almost completely silent. Wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't eat, just sat there. I told him it was nice to meet him, but I had to go home. Later that night I got about 20 messages telling me exactly what he was into in the bedroom and how he wanted me to come over and throw up that mac sauce all over his junk. Yeah, that's a block from me. Then there was Counting Crows Dude. I met the guy on a Counting Crows online forum, again, showing my age, and he happened to live half an hour away. Sure, let's grab drinks at a local bar and see where it goes. I get there, can't find him anywhere, figured I was stood up, and then the lights dimmed and he walked out on stage, drunk as all heck, slurring every other word and proceeded to play Round Here, and stopped halfway through to chuck up on himself. Now I can never hear that song without cracking up. Maria came from Nashville with a suitcase in her. It's odd that both incidents involved hurling to some degree. He took it out. And I don't mean this in a funny, unexpected Seinfeld kind of way, although I suppose it is that. I mean, he leaned across the table and whispered, "I'm out." I said, "Excuse me?" For some reason, my first thought was, out of the closet. He said, "Out, under the table. Look under the table." And like an idiot, I looked. Then he said, "That's what you do to me." I said, "And this is what you do to me," and I left. I'm a people pleaser, so to this day I'm proud of myself for walking away in the middle of dinner. She took her hands off the wheel and said, "You think I'm crazy?" I literally jumped out at the next light. Oh, this story's always fun to tell. Basically, we got back to her place after dinner and we were starting to have some fun on the couch. As things started escalating, she pulls out a giant glass jar, like the ones with the finger loop thing that pirates put rum in, half full of clear liquid. My dumb idiot self asked her if it was moonshine or vodka or something, and then she proceeded to explain that it was pure GHB and that she has a thing about getting wasted off it before doing the deed. And she said that with a completely serious face. For those of you who don't know, GHB is a substance frequently used by those trying to perform the unspeakable act on dates. She then went to the restroom and I noped out of there so fast that I practically levitated off the couch. Never spoke to her again. I picked her up and she asked me if we could stop by her mum's house so she could run in and grab something. I said sure. Made the stop. She went inside. 5 minutes later, she comes out hustling towards the car with a car seat and her mum chasing her, yelling. She opens the car door, throws in the car seat, which I now see has a baby in it, and starts yelling at me to drive. I freaked out and just turned my car off and took the keys out of the ignition. Her mum called the cops and they came and questioned all of us for a good while. Turns out she had lost custody due to substance use and was trying to use me as a way to get her kid back. We never made it to dinner and I just went home after the cops left. Wow, I've heard people going on dates for free meals or to make someone jealous. I've never heard of someone taking someone on a date to act as a getaway driver while they acted in contempt of court, though. So well done on getting that rare achievement. Your Steam profile will update with it soon. Happened to my sister, but they found out the guy had the same uncommon last name as her. Then when she asked where he was from, it was from the same small town that our great-grandparents are from. They awkwardly laughed and just immediately ended the date. She kept writing to her friends on WhatsApp a play-by-play of the date instead of listening to me. So I stood up, paid for my dinner, and left because I found it disrespectful as frick. I met this girl on the apps, and we're talking and she invites me over hours after matching. Alright, sure. Things are alright through text. Her mum's there and is messed up, like mixing painkillers and alcohol messed up. She's at the table just mumbling and dozing off and asking me effed up stuff. Then her sister and sister's boyfriends are there and they're drunk and having a screaming match fight while we're all just talking and hanging out at the table. The girl I'm on the date with seemed more normal than the other three, and most of the time she's talking about her 9 or 10-year-old daughter and is complaining about how she lives in another state and how she's never had custody of her, and complaining about how we lived in a screwed-up state that always gives custody to the fathers. Which is a lie. I live in Colorado and I never meet any divorced dads with full custody unless the mum straight up left and even lived with my mum after my parents divorced when I would have been better off with my dad. So I leave and she asks me, how about a second date? And I tell her, sorry to be blunt, but that was a crap show and I was very uncomfortable and I don't think we'll align. She goes off on me about how everyone has a crazy mum, I'm normal, and how drunk people fight, it's what they do. And then finally, and here's the clincher, how I sound like Child Protection Services and that I was a freaking weirdo, and started hurling insults at me, and then said I should have disclosed my medical condition. I have no clue what she was talking about. It didn't need to be like that. I would have picked her up, taken her to dinner and a movie or walk or literally anything. But nope, she straight up told me to come to her house with her substanced-up mum, drunk sister, and boyfriend with zero warning. Ooh, mine's a bit fresh. I was asked when I'd get a real career. I love what I do. I'm a union stagehand in a major entertainment city. I've been in my industry for over 20 years, toured the country, toured the world, and make a comfortable living. Yeah, no, that's pretty demeaning, and I'm out. He told me that he'd been kicked out of his church for being caught in bed with someone underaged, but reassured me that it totally wasn't what it looked like. Her kid called me Daddy. told me that aliens cause jet lag and that I've the ghost of a fisherman following me around named Samuel, on top of the other 20 bat crap things she said at dinner. This was last night, by the way. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. He just kept making a weird amount of jokes about tapeworms. Also, this happened while we were eating sushi, just in case anyone was wondering. She clicked her fingers at the waitress, stunning but vapid as frick. He insisted on paying for our dinner instead of going Dutch, and then totally stiffed the server. I tried to leave a tip and he got angry at me because he was paying and it was his decision to tip or not. Ooh, I have a wee collection from the lads I've dated over the years. He tried to force a kiss. Another who tried to get me to marry him the next week. No, he wasn't an immigrant. Another who said women were stupid and would believe anything he told them. I'm a woman, man. One who said it was okay to drown puppies and it was actually humane. And then there was the guy who swore that it was impossible to get acquired immunodeficiency syndrome if he was straight. I found out a week later that he knew the whole time he was human immunodeficiency virus positive. That's just some of them. There are various different men throughout my lifetime, and in no particular order, I was just writing them down as they came to mind. Can't believe I nearly forgot that last guy. Scariest of them all. He tried way too hard to get me to go home with him. I'm glad common sense won out that day. I was 16 and he was 18. He referred to every woman as the C word, and we aren't in a country where that's common and harmless. His ex was apparently a C word, his aunt was a bunt, some random author he was telling me about for some reason was also a shunt, stuff like that. The C word doesn't really bother me, but the way he said it was very gendered and angry. After that, he decided to argue with me about sports and politics and berate me for my choices in those areas. No need for a second date after that. That guy was a funt. Being told off the bat that the welts on my crotch aren't contagious really put me off them. I went on a date with a woman from the office. I thought we had good chemistry and got along well. She couldn't find her phone, so I tried calling it, and someone from the restaurant answered. I went back in for her to get it, and the waiter showed me I was saved in her contacts under free food. I guess I'll repost this here. She kept talking about the emergency eggplants she had stashed around the city. She was like, I've been really busy with grad school, but I don't go without. I have plenty of emergency sausage around town, if you know what I mean. And when I say she kept going on, I mean she kept going on. She was telling me about the 2 guys downtown, 3 in the suburbs, 1 near campus, and 2 in her apartment complex. It honestly sounded like I was new to town, and she was giving me a rundown of all the best places to visit. It was just weird. I was newly out, and I had a crush on her for ages, so when she asked me out, I was so excited. She was pretty, smart, very laid back, and had a great sense of humor, so things were going great initially. End of the date comes around and she very casually drops the bomb on me that she's involved in an open investigation for vehicular manslaughter. She even hinted that it was purposeful and didn't seem to regret anything. That was the end of that. Ow! I think I just experienced sympathetic conversational whiplash for you. My goodness, I can't imagine going from being stoked that your crush asked you out to suddenly going, oh, they killed someone and may have done it intentionally. Lordy lord. I met her parents on the first date and she was terrified of me. Most awkward date ever. He said nothing. I get that he was nervous, but I was engaging. I asked questions that should have led to at least a few sentences of conversation, but no, one-word answers for everything. It was dinner and a movie, so our only opportunity to talk was dinner. It was like pulling teeth. No thanks, no second date. Nothing obvious or overt, but from the minute we sat down to eat, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I felt unsafe. He was polite, listened, very polished, but I just couldn't shake that feeling. I drove to the restaurant to meet, so he didn't know where I lived. After dinner, he asked for another date and I just said, no, I don't think we're a good match. I gave him money to pay for my half, said goodbye, and when I got to the door, I turned around and he was staring at me with an expression I never hoped to see again. I ran to my car, moved it to another spot, and waited until he left before I left, so he couldn't follow. The restaurant was on an isolated road, so that was safer than having him catch up to me. Found out about a year later he was sent to prison for the unspeakable act against 2 different women. It happened on first dates. Never used a dating site again. Trust your instincts, ladies. It was my first date. I was 17 and worked as an office assistant's helper. The guy, who was 20, also worked there. I don't remember what his job title was. He asked me to a drive-in movie. He came to the house and met my mum, did the whole song and dance to her about taking good care of me, get me home on time, all that crap. I was still nervous though, so I arranged with 2 friends to go to the same movie in their car. My date didn't know about them. They parked 3 cars down from us. After we parked, the guy is telling me to relax. He just wanted company for the movie. He respected me. So I'm thinking, cool. The movie started. I don't think the opening credits had finished and he was all over me. It was like he grew 4 extra arms in seconds. I pushed him off me and said, "What the frick?" He apologized and said he was sorry. He thought I'd like it and he couldn't help himself because I was so cute or whatever. I told him I didn't like it and to keep his hands to himself. I get maybe 2 drinks of my soda down and he tries again. Now I'm angry. I get out of the car, throw my drink at him and walk off. I go to my friend's car and get in. The guy didn't see where I went because he was dealing with dripping soda on him and his car. My friends and I left. The following Monday at work was really awkward and he avoided me like the plague. This is why to this day I've never again dated anyone I've worked with. She asked me if I could clean her pet rat cage or hold the rat while she cleaned it. Also listed a number of handyman tasks she needed me to tackle. The girl who spent the first half of the dinner date talking about her irritable bowel syndrome and then switched to her love for God after the main course. She looked nothing like her photos, smelled of cat pee-covered taquitos. We were at the park and saw some girls playing softball and she said, "Those girls look like special ed with those helmets." Like, frick. I'm always down to give someone a chance, but just yikes. I made an excuse to leave. My car smelled for like 2 days after that. He threw a temper tantrum because the restaurant he wanted to go to was closed due to the tropical storm that was going on. Sad, because I was having a great time walking around Manhattan while the storm raged. I had every intention of going home with him until that tantrum. She wouldn't stop going on and on about how much she wanted a baby, called it her little creation and how she wanted multiple, tried to convince me to come back to her place for some fun. I dropped her off and dipped right away. She texted me every now and then afterwards, trying to meet up again. Hell no. We went to her place to watch movies and we chose Kung Fu Panda 2. From the moment it began, she proceeded to cackle at every single joke. Anything that could even be perceived as mildly funny set her off like the Wicked Witch of the West. I know some people have interesting laughs, and it wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't constant from beginning to end. After that, she put on Iron Man and same thing, witch cackling the entire movie. There's a point in the movie where a character's phone goes off and the ringtone is an old Iron Man theme, which made me chuckle, at which she turned to me and says, "You laugh at all the weirdest parts." The second the movie was over, I got out of there and didn't see her again. I hold out hope that her saying that was some kind of self-aware joke, but then again I do get the admittedly shallow urge to run when someone laughs constantly and in an unattractive way. I'm not proud of it, but it is a whole thing. The date felt more like a job interview to fill a position rather than an actual date. He gave off a vibe of someone who wasn't into getting to know me as a person, but just listed his wants and needs. So at the end of the date, he asked me how I thought it went, and I said I didn't feel a click or a match. And he said, yeah, he was missing the wow factor. So I laughed my butt off, slightly offended, in the car on my way home. Gosh, I had no idea I was auditioning for a contest. I was happy we only went out for drinks, but even that felt a bit too long. Took her to dinner and then took her to a late-night car meet. Upon arriving to the meet, she started crap with several other girls she had beef with at her school, and she hasn't talked to me since high school. We were well into our 20s, she was even older than me. I don't get how some people make high school beef their entire personality for years. Oh, just so many. But I'll say the one where the guy was kind and polite, but wanted to move way too fast. I'm not talking about bedroom stuff. Grabbed my chin and tried to turn my head for a kiss while we were watching a movie. It was Surrogates with Bruce Willis, if you're wondering. He didn't try again after I pulled away, though. He also mentioned he should get to know the state where I grew up and where my family lived since he'd be meeting them soon. He'd also catfished with a pic of his older brother, which was sad to me since he was really cute himself. He insisted on walking me to my car. I'd parked near the attendant in a garage. Glad I made that decision, and while I was getting in, he asked if he could tell his mum he had a girlfriend. We were both in our early 20s, by the way. Poor guy. Since he was just over-enthusiastic and not an outright creep or jerk, I did email him telling him why there wouldn't be a second date, saying he came on too strong, but I wished him well. I hope he found someone. I also kind of wondered if it was a cultural thing I wasn't aware of. He was Indian, but I can't say either way.
Reddit, tell me your glitch in the Matrix story. I'm talking weird occurrences, coincidences you haven't been able to easily explain. I'll start. We have a breakfast laid on at work every morning. Just a simple buffet of eggs, bacon, what have you. Nothing huge, and it's really only to feed about a dozen people or so. I'm usually one of the first guys from my team to get to work, and the kitchen was deserted as usual. I walked into the little kitchen, and there was a ceramic egg tray thing with 12 eggs in it, like the bottom half of an egg carton with a socket for each egg. All spaces are filled with warm, freshly boiled eggs. I take one, walk over to the garbage bin, shuck the shell, then I walk back over to the food and stop dead. There are 12 eggs in the tray again. No one entered the room while I was peeling the thing. I touched the mystery egg, and it was the same temperature as the other eggs around it. Not a big thing, nothing major, but something very strange, given one does not get presented with strange eggs from a parallel universe every day. I peeled and ate that one too. When I was around 20, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to a point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected to her. After a few months, she stopped showing up and I dismissed it, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009. I'm in the car with a friend stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto a highway when I get a phone call from a random number. So I stopped the car, but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second they get on the highway, some silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both cars had died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't have gotten that phone call. Called it back a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity. Rang 3 times and went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number. Never had goosebumps like that in my life. Called it again the next day because I was that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers and we get to talking. I tell her my entire story including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird. Ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. Check her Facebook? Holy crap, it's her. If that's not a glitch in the Matrix, then I'm just crazy. This happened about 15 years ago. I called my friend up and he wasn't home, so I left a message on his answering machine. I said, "Hey, it's me. Sorry I missed you. Call you later. Bye." And then I hung up and left the house. I made no other calls. Later that day, he called back and says, "Wow, that was quite a message you left. Who was that girl you were talking to?" I was like, "What are you talking about? I wasn't talking to any girl." Well, as it turns out, the message didn't end after I said bye. I had to go over to his house and listen to this message a few times. After my initial message that I did leave, there was a slight pause and it continues for another 30 or 40 seconds or so of me talking to some strange girl. It was my voice, but a conversation I never had with a girl whose voice I didn't recognize. You could compare it to the message I know I did leave, and the two voices were indistinguishable. Not just the voice, but, talking mannerisms. It was my voice. Also, references to my occupation and activities were the same. Basically, in this conversation, I was talking to this girl about going skiing, but I had to go down to my shop and work on a car first, which totally correlated to me. Then the message just stopped. It was recorded on one of those digital answering machines that recorded the message to a chip, so there was no tape I could have taken and had analyzed. Unfortunately. Also, neither I nor my friend had party lines, so that's not an explanation. It was very freaky. I can't explain it. Driving home on a stormy day, I see that a side road up to the local golf course is blocked off by flashing barricades. I also spy a Mercedes parked past the barricades with its hazards on. I stop and walk up to the car to see if they need any help. I'm an EMT. I shine my light in the back seat to see a man slumped over apparently asleep. Thinking I've got a few drunks, I move up to the driver window and rap on the glass and shine my light in. The driver is sitting bolt upright, unmoving, staring straight ahead. My window rapping or light light doesn't cause him to blink, flinch, or move. I look over and the passenger is slumped forward onto the dash. This begins to creep me out. I call down to the sheriff's station and request a unit to come up to my location to help me check them out, since the doors of the car were locked. While on the phone, I walk back to my truck to get my go bag. As I'm on the phone with dispatch, she asks me to get a license number for the car, just as a massive truck comes rumbling down from up the closed road. I move to go around the truck to get the plate number, and the car's gone. I talked to the driver of the truck and he said there was an 80-foot tree down across the road, and that he didn't think it'd be open for a day or so. The question is, where did the car go? Tree up one way, barricades down the other. It's kept me a bit unsettled when stopping at accidents and hazards since then. This happened to me in the 3rd grade, and it scared me so much I started crying and had to go to the office to talk to the principal about it. I was in the hallway for misbehaving, and my neighbor, Tad, a year younger than me, came walking out of a class to my right, passed in front of me, and headed down some stairs. We said hi to each other. About 20 seconds later, he walked out of the same class, passed in front of me, and headed down the stairs. I just stared at him, confused and afraid, and he looked back like, "Why are you looking at me like that?" I never realized how much it was like the Matrix deja vu. At 12 years of age, my mom let me stay in the truck as she went grocery shopping. As I wait, I see an old guy walking towards the truck with an indescribable look at me as if I know too much. He stops 5 feet from the truck, looks at me for a couple of seconds, and heads back the exact way he came. It was rather traumatic for some reason and very confusing at that age. 5 or 6 years later, my dad was showing me home videos of us at Yellowstone. At Old Faithful, I noticed the same guy, same look, same clothes, peering at us on camera and at me through the TV. I'm freaked out just telling this. At a friend's place back in 2008, when we were all teenagers, we had a cool shed at a friend's that we'd hang out in every weekend. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, TV, fridge, etc. The whole lot. One night, we were all hanging out in there when I decided I needed to use the bathroom. I walked out the front door of the shed and started walking to the right where I stopped. Now, let me explain the layout here. As you walk out of the shed, his house is to the left, and to the right is where we all parked our cars. Further out, you're left with empty fields and trees. It was dark by now, the lights from the house illuminating the space between the house and our cars, but trailing off just past them. As I took a step to the right, intending to go behind the cars to relieve myself, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a good 5 to 10 seconds as he stood there, facing into the darkness. He then proceeded to walk behind a couple of trees and a car before he disappeared. Confused, I walked back into the shed and asked my friend what his brother was doing by the cars. The conversation went as follows. "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?"
What do you mean?
"He just walked off behind the cars." "I'm right here." I looked over and there his brother was, sitting down on one of the chairs with a drink. He was wearing the exact same clothes I saw him in, and the only way to get into the shed was through the door that I was standing in the way of. To this day, I have no idea how it happened at all. I'm guessing I was just seeing things, but the fact that I watched him walk around for a good 10 seconds has always puzzled me. I've never had anything else like this happen. I have one of these that involves the Matrix. I got my wisdom teeth out in 2000, right around the time that the original Matrix came out on VHS. I was bombed completely out of my mind on Percocet after coming back from the surgery. I had awful wisdom teeth, and my mom basically just dropped me in bed and went and rented the movie for me because I'd never seen it in theaters. I remember being irritated that the sun through the window was making the TV glare, but being too out of it to get up. A little bit after the black cat glitch in the Matrix scene, I passed out and apparently slept for about 8 hours. The tape in the VHS machine kept rewinding itself and playing over and over again. I woke up and the movie was at roughly the same spot as when I passed out, but it was completely dark outside. 0 time lapse for me. Completely lost my mind. Started freaking out and screaming because I thought I discovered the secret and somebody turned off the sun. I remember crying and trying to explain to my panicked family who have never let me live it down. I think the strangest glitch I found was back when I was in high school. I was talking to a friend on the phone, describing a dream I had about an ice skating rink, and then he starts to describe the rest of the dream to me from the opposite point of view. It was a while ago, so I don't remember everything, but we both described the scenery, what the people were doing, etc. It really freaked me out when it happened. My dad has this little toy monkey that he used to call his favorite child and tease me and my siblings with it. Not in a bad way, but it was really frustrating to us and we spent hours trying to steal it from him. Well, anyways, one day we got it and threw it in the garbage after drawing on it and mangling it for a bit. My dad laughed and searched for it for a bit, but basically figured we'd thrown it out and gave up after a week or so. Anyway, a few years later, when I was about 17, I'm walking down the street in Toronto. I don't live in Toronto, was just visiting friends, and see this little orange object on the side of the road. When I walk over to it, I pick up and see that it was the exact same monkey. It even had the black Sharpie lines on it from when we drew all over it. I honestly cannot even come up with the chances of that happening, especially considering our garbage is sent to a local dump and is nowhere near Toronto. I actually took it with me and killed it with fire just so I knew it wouldn't come back again. I had a friend in high school. Let's call him Bob. Bob was a very nice fellow, and while we weren't that close, we had similar tastes in music and we'd share CDs. This is the late 80s, way before file sharing. Anyway, we eventually graduated and I moved several hundred miles away to college, and we lost touch. When I left for college, I had one of Bob's CDs still in my possession, Beat by King Crimson. Fast forward 10 years. I'd graduated college and was knee deep in my career, and finally saved up enough money and bought my first house. In the new house, and while unpacking, I see the CD in a box. Hadn't noticed it in many years and thought, gee, I should really track down Bob and return this. Right then, the doorbell rings. It's Bob, and he says, "Hey, you wouldn't happen to still have my King Crimson CD, would you?" I look down, I'm holding it in my hand. I hand it to him and his mouth drops open. Mine probably already is. We exchanged pleasantries and I probably asked him how he found me, but I no longer remember. He eventually takes off. I haven't seen Bob since. I was a satellite installer and I was driving between two small towns in North Carolina, Statesville and Taylorsville. It's about a 20-minute drive of a perfectly straight 2-lane road with pretty much nothing but trees on either side. It's the middle of the day and I'm driving along listening to Howard Stern on Sirius when all of a sudden I go from wide awake to falling asleep, meaning 1 second I'm normal and a second later my head is drooping down and eyes closing. And what snaps me out of it is my car bounces like it just hit a speed bump, but I'm still in the middle of the road. Howard Stern is still in the same sentence, but my GPS signal says it's lost. And then I hear recalculating. And when it comes back, I realize I'm about 12 miles further down the road than I was, and I'd missed my turn by 5 miles. My immediate thought, even though I consider myself a level-headed atheist, was that I fell asleep, hit a tree, and died, and was now in some weird afterlife. It was such a strong feeling that I drove to the nearest gas station, got out, headed inside with sweaty palms, feeling that the cashier inside was not going to be able to see me. To my relief, she did, and I bought a Red Bull. I still think I was hypnotized by the road and drove on some weird autopilot for a while, but losing the GPS signal and not missing any of Howard Stern is unexplainable to me. I even used the Sirius ability to rewind, and there was none of the show that I missed. I used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements, with the piece of lab equipment I typically worked on in the lowest basement. I had the only key. There was a wired phone in there and I did work late some nights, but not this night. I was sleeping alone in my apartment when I woke up to a call on my cell phone from my girlfriend at 3 a.m. She was in hysterics asking why I scared her. Apparently, she received a call from that basement phone just a minute earlier, with someone who sounded like me slowly repeating her name, until crackling and fading out. My apartment was 10 miles away from work. I thought she was lying, but I saw the 3 a.m. call from the basement phone logged on her cell myself. Still freaks me the heck out. My friend used to put up a recurring away message back in the day when everybody had AIM. She was a Beatles superfan and put up a sentiment from John and Yoko, Acorns for Peace. Well, one day I was walking around my college campus thinking about it, but failing to remember the full quote for some reason. In my mind, I kept thinking, something for peace. Something for peace. What the heck is that message anyway? Right then, some chick on a cell phone walks by me and screams, "Acorns!" I realize this is not a super freaky story, but it made my day at the time. It's not every day someone screams out "Acorns" in your vicinity at the exact right time. I have two stories that are just super weird. Both of them are things I would just not believe if someone else told them to me. But I can swear with every fiber of my being that they happened as I write them here. The first happened a couple years ago. I can't remember the occasion, but my mother and I had gone to A&W for lunch, and we were both sitting there eating our meals. We happened to be seated pretty close to the washroom doors, so I noticed everyone who was going in and out. First person to come out is this old man who's kind of hobbling along. He walks past and I looked at him and went on with my meal. Not 30 seconds later, another man comes out of the bathroom, and at this point, I get a little freaked out because I realize it's the exact same person. Same limp, clothing, face, everything. A couple minutes later, the same thing happens, except it's an old woman this time. She comes out, then 30 seconds later, comes right out of the bathroom again. My mom took a look at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just kind of stammered a bit, then wrote it off as me being crazy. The second story is more weird in my opinion, and the single strangest occurrence of my life. This happened when I was about 9 years old, but I can still remember it vividly. We were visiting family in Nevada with my dad, and they lived out in a very dry area in a fairly good-sized trailer. A couple days in, I was playing with my cousin, pretty much just messing around in the dirt. At some point, I look up. Right next to the house is field, I guess, surrounded by wire fence, probably originally for livestock. But anyway, there's this guy standing there. This is a good 300 or more feet away, so I can't see him clearly. Cue the weird. As soon as I look at this guy, I have what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. My body pretty much just went into lockdown and I was no longer seeing through my eyes. And I wasn't just floating there or anything. I was in that man's body. Through his eyes, I could see two little shapes playing across the field, but I could just feel that he saw the shapes as animals. And then I realized he was holding a shotgun. After that, I regained my body and blurted out, "We have to go indoors," offering no explanation to my cousin, who thought I was nuts. I didn't tell anyone because I just didn't know how to express it to other people back then. I've only since told my brothers, but I don't think they believed me. Still freaks me out when I think about it today, because it's the only time I've ever lost control of my body. It was almost like a dream, but the whole thing was happening in slow motion. Josh, the guitarist of the band's best friend Matt, had died a couple of years back. He always talked about the kid and he seemed like a great guy. Josh always had this reoccurring dream where Matt was standing on this abandoned street, which supposedly was metaphorical for purgatory. Josh had all these conversations with Matt in these dreams, and because he had overdosed unexpectedly, he felt like his spirit was not able to move on. At the end of the dreams, Matt would take a bulb from the street light on the street they were standing in the middle of. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail, and I could pretty much picture what the street looked like. Fast forward to about 6 months into touring with these guys. They were huge Bright Eyes fans and wanted to stop in Cassadaga, Florida. Bright Eyes singer wrote an album there, and it's a really creepy, spiritual medium place. It might be worth noting that 6 out of 7 of the people that I was with were all atheists. So we drive into Cassadaga around 2 or 3 a.m. and drive around. Suddenly, this big black dog comes in the middle of the road and just stops and looks at us. The guys in this band were weird as heck and were saying things like, "Follow the dog, it's trying to show us something." And in my mind, I'm just thinking they're all idiots. We follow this dog for a few blocks as it was walking pretty slowly. All of a sudden, we turn a street and this dog bolts. We try to speed up, but Josh says, "Stop the van. This is it." We're all confused and he gets out of the van and looks around. This is it. This is the street in my dreams. We hang out for about 15 minutes, and from the way he described the street, from having houses on the left to a park on the right, it was definitely the street. As we get in the van, a street light goes off and we just drove off. He claims he never had any more dreams about it, and that was closure on everything. My dad used to get up around 3 a.m. every morning for work. Starting at a very early age, I would wake up on my own and wander downstairs to see him before he left. One morning, when I was about 4 years old, I made it to the bottom of the stairs and noticed that the front door was ajar. I opened it up and saw my father in his favorite work shirt making his way down the driveway to his truck in his typical work outfit, plaid shirt and dickies. I swung the door open wide and yelled for him to come back for a hug before he left. He slowly turned around and just stared stared at me and started walking back towards the house. He was looking so strangely at me that it started to scare me, and I began crying and asking what was wrong. Just as he had almost reached me, a pair of arms encircled me from behind in a big bear hug. I turned my head to see my understandably freaked out father staring at his doppelganger in the same outfit. The double took one look at my dad and ran down the driveway. Meanwhile, my dad yanked me in the house and locked the door. Weirdest morning ever. Never did quite figure that one out. I would not trust my 4-year-old memory of the event if it wasn't also witnessed by my father. He won't really talk about it to this day, but my mom has told me that he called out of work and she spent the day reassuring him he wasn't a nutcase. I was in class one day, sitting in a group of 3 people, including myself. We were talking and my friend dropped his pen on the desk. I saw it stall in midair for a second, then drop on his desk. My friend asked, "Did anyone else see that?" All my friends saw it, and it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. To this day, I have no explanation for it. It wouldn't be a big deal if there weren't 3 of us that witnessed it happen. Runaway brides of Reddit, what's your story? What was the final straw? How last second did you leave? On my 18th birthday, my boyfriend proposed to me at my party, in front of all my family and friends. I said yes mostly because I was too embarrassed to say no. We'd been dating for 2 years, but I was just about to start university. I wasn't ready at all. I asked later, when we were alone, if we could have a long engagement, at least a year or 2, and he agreed. We told our families and friends we would be waiting to get married. Less than 3 months later, his mom and my mom took me out for lunch and decided to take me to look at wedding dresses, because it's never too early to start planning. When I saw a really lovely dress that was on sale, my fiance's mother insisted on buying it for me. Their family was quite wealthy and had money set aside for all of my fiance's milestones: education, first car, wedding, etc. She told me they were happy to cover the major costs as they were the ones who wanted a big wedding, and I joked I could pay her back in grandchildren. A few weeks later, his mom introduced me to a friend who was a florist. Next thing I know, I'm looking at bouquets and discussing table arrangements. Then my fiance starts talking about venues for our wedding, saying we need to start planning so we can find the perfect place. By this point, I'm truly panicking. I'm just a few months into university. I haven't even fully decided what I want to do with my education. Now I'm choosing venues for a wedding that's supposed to be years away? A wedding that's suddenly looking like nuptials of a minor royal? I tried talking to my fiance, but he just wouldn't listen. We saw a venue we liked, but they had no availability for almost 2 years. So we booked it and I could finally breathe again. I had 2 years to get ready for my big fat crazy wedding. Then the venue had a cancellation for less than 6 months away, and my fiance accepted it without telling me. Just canceled our future date and took the one that was now available. Then he arranged the entire wedding with the help of his mom and mine, damn her helicopter ways, before telling me. When he told me everything was booked, I went mental. His reaction was that he'd gone with all of my choices regarding catering, venue, flowers, etc., and so I should be grateful that he dealt with all the stressful stuff. All I had to do was turn up. When I explained that I didn't want to get married in 6 months' time and that this was the 3rd or 4th time I told him I wasn't ready for marriage yet, he told me that I was being childish and that the invitations were at the printer, so it was too late to change my mind. I finally realized that he was manipulating me, so I gave him the engagement ring back and told him I didn't want to see him anymore. I told my family and friends, cried a lot, changed my number because he wouldn't stop calling, etc. 2 months later, my mom got a call from his mother because she hadn't been able to get in touch with me to arrange dress fittings and finalize bridesmaids. He hadn't even told them we split up. My mother explained everything to his mother and figured that was that. The following week, she had the audacity to present my family with a bill for half of what they paid out for the wedding. It came out to thousands of pounds. They'd booked everything, right down to the cake and the favors, without telling me and wanting me to pay. My friend met a guy and within a week they were engaged. He was in the military and ghosted her about a month after proposing. 6 months later, he turns up and starts working at the same place as her and acted like he didn't even know her. Does that count? I was 17 at the time, and still in high school. Met an alleged army guy, pre-full swing internet, so no way to really check, and we hit it off. I was young and fell in love with guys real fast, so when he proposed, I was ecstatic. The red flags were there. He asked my parents for permission. He proposed loudly at a pizza shop, which socially would have been too awkward to say no anyway. He didn't have his own place. I never met his family, and I never saw any evidence of being in the military. Cue a few weeks later, we had a fight because he called out his sister's name during sex. He then told me that everything would be fine because he was going to take me to Kentucky to live on an army base. He also told me he wanted me to be barefoot and pregnant most of the time. Ha ha ha. We were going to get married and leave the day after I graduated high school. I did some real soul searching. I became withdrawn and quiet. I was visiting my Nana one day and she asked me, "Are you in love with him or in love with the idea of a wedding?" And just like that, the bubble burst. I cried and broke it off with him 2 weeks before I graduated. Apparently, he'd already booked the justice of the peace, but he got married anyway 3 weeks later with the same ring he gave me. Poor girl. I wish I knew her so I could warn her. Had a friend that didn't know she was the bride until she was halfway down the aisle. Her parents had arranged a marriage for her, common in her culture, and had told her that the family had all been invited to a cousin's wedding. My friend was told everyone was going to be wearing white for whatever reason. I don't remember. They arrived at the church just before the bride was scheduled to walk down the aisle. My friend, thinking they're late, wanted to slip in and stay in the back. Her father, however, takes her arm and they start walking up the aisle. It isn't until they're halfway up that she stops and realizes everyone is looking at her and smiling and crying tears of joy. She turned to one of her aunts in the pew next to her and asked them who was getting married. The whole church went silent, and then the aunt looked at my friend's father and said, "You can't be serious. You planned a wedding for your daughter and just expected her to go along with it? Have the two of them even met? Did you seriously think this would work?" The whole room was then chattering about them, and the father just cleared his throat and told his daughter to keep walking. Luckily, the aunt grabbed my friend first and pulled her into the pew, pushed her past the row of people, and they both ran out of the church. Her parents disowned her after that, and she moved in with that aunt. At least she had one person in her family who was looking out for her interests. A woman I briefly dated was a runaway bride. Her ex never hit her but constantly belittled her and was basically emotionally abusive. Your standard kid, telling her she was lucky he wanted her, that she could never find anyone better, that she was ugly but he dealt with it, etc, etc, etc. She was a smart kid, was a medic in the military, saving dozens of lives in Pakistan. But emotionally manipulative people can get anyone if given enough time, and he got her. On her wedding day, her dad, who wasn't usually in the picture, having divorced when she was a teen, was having a conversation with her in the ready room, and got concerned when she started repeating a lot of the things her fiancé was saying to her. She said that she was mid-sentence when he stood up and said, "Let's go to Dairy Queen," out of the blue. When she was little, they often went to DQ and talked over ice creams. She took a second, agreed, and they left to go to DQ. But he drove 3 towns over, and they sat and talked over ice cream for hours while her phone rang the battery dead in the car. She said she felt like a huge weight was lifted and felt bad that her friends and family were waiting for her, but they would all understand later. He eventually got back to the church and told the bridal party it wasn't happening, and got his buddies to come and move all her stuff out the next day. She said that while her dad wasn't the best father in her teens, he was the best dad anyone could ask for that day. We dated for a couple weeks before we figured out we weren't a good match. We parted amicably, but I haven't talked to her since. Not me, and I'm not sure if it counts as a runaway, but my sister broke up with her fiancé 4 months before their wedding, which was already planned and paid for. I'll be honest, I don't know the full story. Even now, 18 months later, she still hasn't fully opened up to us about it. But I never really liked the guy. He was nice enough, but he absolutely could not handle his drink. He could never have a little drink. No, he had to drink the whole bar every time, then would come home and puke up over the entire house. He then had the audacity to complain whenever my sister would go out with her friends just for a couple drinks, to the point where he eventually just stopped letting her go out altogether. His family was an absolute mess as well. His mom and stepdad were pretty cool, but they moved to Canada to pursue their dreams, leaving my sister and her fiancé in the hands of aunts and uncles who did not approve of her at all. His little brother was on-off with his teenage girlfriend he eventually knocked up, and who was always trying to one-up my sister too. Eventually, as far as she's told us, she just felt felt trapped by the guy. She was prohibited from hanging out with her friends and was forced to go to family events with people who despised her. He made her distance herself from us, which I think was painful for her as she essentially missed quality time with her new nephews at the time. He basically controlled every aspect of her life. Anyway, she unceremoniously dumped him on New Year's Eve and canceled the wedding then and there. I don't think she ever saw him again after that. She was always out when he came to collect his stuff. Obviously, his family weren't too happy about it and harassed her for months. She became depressed and needed medication, but it was my family that had to foot the wedding bill anyway. They were just glad to have their daughter back. My dad was a runaway groom, broke it off 3 days before the wedding, mid-1970s, so he was in his early 20s. His fiancée, not mom, obviously, and her mother pressured him into proposing, which he did with my grandmother's ring. He also felt society sort of demanded it. It was more common to marry at that age than it is today. Deep down, he knew she simply wasn't the one, but figured maybe all men felt that way before a wedding, so he ignored that and hoped his feelings would change. Months passed and the wedding was all planned out. When relatives and friends from out of town began flying in for the wedding and gifts were arriving, reality hit him hard, and he, to quote Joe Bluth, realized he made a huge mistake. He sat my grandma and grandpa down and said, "Guys, I don't want to do this." They were proud of him for being honest and actually sort of thrilled. It turns out they hated her guts, but they told him he needed to immediately tell her face to face. And so my dad did. Like a scarred war veteran, he refuses to tell me the details, but said it was the most gut-wrenching conversation / argument / hell he had ever experienced. But he ended it. Of course, this was the 1970s. You can't just announce the wedding is canceled via a text or Facebook message, which a friend of mine did. My dad took the responsibility of calling every single invited guest to tell them the wedding was off. Even more, he personally returned the gifts to the people who sent them. His fiancée sold my grandmother's ring. My boyfriend at the time had a female friend who, the night before her wedding, finally spilled to several friends, including him, that her fiancé had been emotionally and physically abusing her, and she wasn't sure she could get married. We'd all noticed her being distant from us, but she would deny every time that something was wrong. The next day, her family mobilized to get the word out to all of her guests, and a bunch of her friends essentially forced themselves into the guy's house to get all her things back. My boyfriend was a cop, so had a duty to press charges or say something to the guy. I was never clear on this part. The woman was pissed off at him for a while, but now a few years later is seeing someone great whom I've actually known forever and is quite a bit happier now. Plus, she knows friends and family have her back and can get things done. I was engaged, so almost a bride, and there were several final straws. A few were before the engagement. He lived in his car at the time, no judgment on that, but it is relevant, so was not financially stable, and this was just a couple of weeks into dating. Another was him wanting me to send selfies of myself, proving where I was at all times, and what I was wearing, which was 99.9% my work clothes. Black long sleeve shirts and pants, cause I'm a server, and I'm at work. So if I wasn't texting back fast enough, apparently I was with another man. About a month into the relationship, he demanded a key to my condo so he could see me whenever he wanted. The final straw was when he proposed, for down on one knee and said, "I knew we were meant to be each other the moment we matched." On Tinder, go figure. "I love you so much. Now I can show everyone I own you. Will you marry me?" Boy, bye. That was 3 months into the relationship. I had never met his family, but heard a lot about them. He had only ever met my mother, but that wasn't planned. I said no immediately and walked away. He tried getting into my condo countless times and calling me. Unfortunately, I had to change my number and get a restraining order against him. He was, and probably is, still crazy AF. One of the people I know is what's called a serial fiancé. She dates guys right until they propose to her. Then she says yes, starts looking for venues, dresses, etc., and then she calls off the wedding and breaks up with the guy, saying, "I didn't want to marry him anyway. He's..." insert reason here. The last time this happened, she had an AMA about her wedding on Instagram, but 2 months before the supposed date of the wedding, all of her photos, AMA answers, and mentions of engagement were gone. Maybe she's getting a kick out of it. I don't know. Not me, but my mother. My mom called off a wedding just weeks before the ceremony date because she found out her fiancé had lied to her about his whereabouts and was partying at a hotel with friends and other women. She caught him in a hot tub at 1 a.m. with twin sisters. Fast forward about 3 years later, she starts dating and marries the man who's my biological father. She said meeting the family was especially awkward when she discovered my father had 3 sisters, 2 of which were the twins she caught her ex-fiancé with in the hot tub. Years ago, I was a single mom, working hard but not getting ahead at all. Met a good guy type, architect, good sense of humor, etc. We dated for about a year, then got engaged. Then the unthinkable happened, and this is where I'm the jerk in many people's minds. He was in a horrible car accident, broke both of his femurs and his back, about 10 months before our wedding. He was a diabetic as well, so his healing was significantly delayed. He ended up confined to an electric wheelchair, and since his legs were in casts from hip to ankle, his legs had to be extended straight out in front of him at all times. I really tried to stick by him, but he made it impossible. He did nothing but complain and moan about every single thing that the doctors told him. Refused physical therapy, would not take his medication correctly, did not cooperate with wound care, wouldn't take his insulin correctly, all the things that make for a horrible patient and even worse person to be around. He managed to get addicted to the narcotics, sleeping pills, and Xanax as well. Through all of this, our wedding planning was still happening, mostly by his family. He was moved from the hospital to a live-in group home where he only declined. Wearing pants was difficult, so he wore nothing on his bottom half for months, just happy with a bedsheet over his lap. No matter what, his moods were totally uncontrollable. He became violent and so verbally abusive. One evening, he missed the final Jeopardy question and threw his open urinal at me. Even after the doctors had insisted that he had to start bending his legs, he absolutely refused. Nope, not gonna do it. Fast forward to my wedding day. The staff at the group home went balls to the wall to decorate the backyard and make this day so special for everyone. It really was lovely. Our families were gathered and seated and the pianist was playing and my dad was by my side. They opened the door for us to start down the aisle and there he sat, with his legs straight out and hospital socks sticking out under a blanket. I froze. Told my dad I needed to go back in the house. Once we were out of earshot of everyone, I told my dad I couldn't do this. I'm so sorry. My dad simply smiled and said, "Thank God." He signaled for my kids to come to the side, loaded them and me in his car, and we drove off. We ended up moving a state away, closer to my family and thriving. The groom did end up in and out of several facilities and has never left the wheelchair. I realized fully that he was suffering from the type of physical, emotional, and mental pain that I will never comprehend. But I knew that I could not raise my kids in that type of environment, and my first commitment was to them. I went on to finish my own degree, and my kids are now adults. No one has thrown urine at me since. I know this must have been a very difficult decision for the original poster, and it sounds like she did her time. She tried to make things work, but I understand where she's coming from. You know why the person's behaving the way they're behaving, and that they are going through a lot of stuff themselves. But when they're not willing to accept any help from you to try and make the situation better, and instead end up just dumping a lot of that stress onto the other person, this isn't a healthy relationship. She made the right decision, and I'm glad she did it. I was almost the runaway bride, and I regret not making that decision. Dated my high school sweetheart for almost 2 years before the jealousy became overwhelming. I broke up with him a month after we graduated, but we were going to the same college and met up again that fall. I found myself pregnant by that October and was kicked out of my Catholic home. His parents let me stay with them, but we could no longer live in sin and had to be married. I didn't want to go back to living in my car, so I agreed. My parents wiggle back into my life before the wedding. Fast forward to the day of the ceremony and the music begins playing. I stand to start walking down the aisle. My dad takes my hand and says, "You know, you don't have to do this. You could just come home with us." WTF? Could he have mentioned this an hour, a day, a week before? I've always hated drama and didn't want to be that person. So I just said that I couldn't, and I got married. My ex was controlling, manipulative, and how abusive he was had become much less subtle since I became pregnant and turned overt when we moved out of his parents' house a year later. I ran when he nearly hit our baby's skull with his shoe, which he threw because he'd found something in the carpet I didn't vacuum properly. Yeah, I totally should have picked the runaway bride option. Not a bride, so to speak, but I ran away from a proposal. I was dating this guy who, in hindsight, was abusive, but at the time I just didn't know it. I knew he was bipolar, diagnosed, and came from a very unstable family. I tried being his rock and getting him to a better place, and sometimes everything was fine, and then others he was just such a jerk. He started talking about marriage about 1 year into the relationship. We had already split up and gotten back together twice due to him throwing tantrums and having wild mood swings about how he felt about the relationship. I just sort of nodded along because, well, I did think I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him, but I wasn't ready to get married yet. I figured he was talking about someday far in the future when we were on more stable ground. A month later he proposed, not even in a very eventful way. Not saying has to be, I mean I just didn't see it coming. We were at his house as usual. Oh yeah, he lived with his parents, and he was playing video games and I was watching TV on my laptop. We'd ordered pizza and the pizza arrived and we sat down to eat for a bit. He then produced a ring and proposed. I saw it all flash before my eyes. Getting married and being stuck to this person for the rest of my life. I froze. Knew I didn't want to say yes, but I was too afraid to say no. Of course, he took my silence as a rejection and started screaming at me about how I was an ungrateful B-word and how could I refuse him. His parents came in and also started screaming at me for rejecting their son. I started crying, got my purse, and ran out of the house. I didn't have my car, so I walked a block and called for an Uber. That poor Uber driver must have been wigged, picking up a girl off the side of the road, bawling her eyes out. I got home and I was shaking. Of course, he tried to call me over and over again, but I refused to speak to him for about 3 weeks. We eventually talked and I told him I didn't want to be with a person who was so unstable and that he needed to get professional help and get better before he and I could work. He, of course, never did, and I haven't heard from him since. We'd been together for 6 months when he proposed. We were both young at the time and weren't even living together. My gut told me right away that it was too soon, but I said yes anyway and went along with it because I thought he loved me and I loved him. I really thought that we could build a nice life together. I made it clear that I wanted to wait a while before we actually got married, but he was keen to speed things along as fast as possible. I didn't even want to tell our families about it yet because I knew they would give us grief over getting engaged so young. And only a few months of being together. As things moved along, I made it clear that I wasn't ready to get married at my age and wanted to spend more time with him before we went through with it. He sort of threw a fit and accused me of cheating on him because there was no other reason in his mind I could possibly want to wait to marry. Things started to get really toxic and I eventually left him for good. I gave him the ring back and parted civilly, but he wasn't about to let it go so easily. He was calling and texting me constantly for weeks, accused me of being obsessed with him and following him around, and I started to realize that he was not in a normal state of mind. I was scared, but it calmed down after a while and things started to get back to normal. Unfortunately, he started spreading all kinds of nasty rumors about me, about how I accused him of being abusive and was abusive towards him. His entire family turned sour towards me because of it, and it was difficult because we shared most of our friends. He ruined my reputation and my self-esteem, but it made me realize that I really dodged one hell of a bullet by refusing to marry him. Every so often, he messages me on social media asking to get back together. I either don't reply or give him a polite but very firm no. This doesn't really matter, but it's another funny little detail. He gave my engagement ring to his mother as a Mother's Day gift, and now she wears it all the time. She has to know it used to belong to me, but still finds it to be a sweet gift from her insane son. Lawyers, has there ever been a time the opposing counsel accidentally proved your case for you? And what happened? My favorite is a story from Jerry Spence. For those who don't know, he's a famous trial attorney. A witness on the stand was claiming he had suffered injuries to his arm because of a city bus accident. Jerry asked him to demonstrate to the jury how far he can lift his arm after the accident. The witness makes a feeble effort of lifting his arm. Then Jerry asks the witness to demonstrate to the jury how far he could lift his arm before the accident. He lifts his arm much higher. The jury laughs and the case is over. Domestic violence case where the husband beat the wife senseless. Landlord tried to evict wife for breach of lease due to the beating. Landlord claimed wife violated lease terms by allowing police to be called to property and causing a disruption. My argument was that as a domestic violence victim, wife is covered under VAWA and the property is HUD subsidized. Also, MD law refers to domestic violence protections too. Landlord's counsel during his opening talked about how my client was beaten and the police were called in an ambulance, etc. I just stood there looking at him. When he finished, judge asked if I had anything to say. My response? No, Your Honor, I believe opposing counsel has said everything that needs to be said. Judge smiled and ruled in my client's favor. Landlord can't evict a domestic violence victim. My family did foster care for a few years, and we fell in love with the last girl we took in, now my younger sister. She was required to keep in regular touch with her emotionally and physically abusive birth mom, the intention being for them to eventually reunite. This woman was a horror. Every single time they interacted, she'd spend the duration painstakingly shredding my sister's self-confidence. My parents worked hard to establish a strong rapport and a supportive environment, and she blossomed under their care. She's one of the most resilient people I know. When the state tried to return her to her mom, she didn't want to go, so my parents made a claim for guardianship. This seemed like it would be an uphill battle. Here we were, a family of randos trying to steal a kid from her rightful mom. We were really afraid that she would have to go back, and that her crappy family would systematically undo all the hard work she'd done rebuilding her self-esteem. Fortunately, her idiot mom decided to represent herself at the guardianship hearing. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the audio recording later on, and it's incredible how thoroughly this woman shot herself in the foot. Here are some highlights. She kept trying to testify while cross-examining people. Example, would it surprise you to learn that blah blah blah? The judge called her out for this like 6 separate times, and she just kept doing it. She would admit to various incidents of emotional abuse, but then try to argue that it was all justified because her daughter was being a B-word. She'd ask witnesses, for example, and wouldn't you be angry if your daughter did XYZ? Yes or no? My personal favorite and the best example of her proving our case, it is absolutely not true that I hit my daughter with a wooden spoon. I only tried and missed. I'll prove it. I can show you the mark it left on the doorframe. Needless to say, we won guardianship. My sister never has to see that awful woman again unless she damn well pleases. I worked as an intern for a lawyer. Construction laws in France are quite strict in regard to the neighboring of historical monuments. The city was denying a permit for heavy modification of the house of our clients. They were arguing that because you could see the house from the church's bell tower, modifications were impossible. As a support, they kindly linked us to a 360 picture from said bell tower. We, as kindly, pointed to them that our client's house was indeed not visible from the top of the church. Building permit was greenlit the following day. Not a lawyer, but I am a former insurance fraud investigator. We were at a hearing before the WCB. I had something like 18 hours of video spread over a 2-week period of a claimant doing roofing work. The problem for me was that the video didn't get a clear face shot. Normally, what we like to do was get in close, show the face for a positive identification, and then zoom out. Bonus if the claimant was wearing distinctive clothing that could easily be tied to him. Because of where this guy lived, all I could do was show someone who matched his description getting out of a truck registered to him every morning. He wore a hat, he had a beard, and he had neither at the hearing. So the company lawyer is prepping me and basically letting me know to be on point, because the claimant's attorney is almost certainly going to challenge the fact that it is his client in the video. If the video got tossed, the case was lost. About 2 minutes into the hearing, claimant's attorney agrees to stipulate to the fact that it is his client in all of the video. All of it. Our attorney was shocked. That was pretty much the only leg he had to stand on. Claimant's attorney was incredibly smug right after this, like it was no big deal. Evidently, his strategy was to show that his client wasn't really a professional roofer since he was doing the roof the wrong way. He tried to get me to answer questions about roofing. I refused as it was beyond the scope of my work, and he just wouldn't let it go. After about an hour of back and forth over this, the judge finally said, "Counselor, it doesn't matter if your client is doing the work well. What matters is that he has stated numerous times and under oath that he cannot work. Whether he's doing it for free, for cash, or for fun has no bearing on the fact that he's doing roofing work while collecting compensation benefits which he was awarded because he couldn't do roofing work." The guy lost and had to repay a bunch of benefits. After a few of those hearings, I began formulating a list of lawyers I would never hire and ones I would absolutely want on my side. I had to go to court over a financial mess-up when I was a student. Took advice from the university legal support team who said I didn't need a solicitor, so I went in alone. The judge didn't like this and postponed it for another date so I could prove I'd had more counsel first. The other party's solicitor caught me outside the court and said, "I didn't tell you this, but," and pointed out a huge error in the financial paperwork that made it very obviously come out in my favor. Went back to legal support, got confirmation that it was right, went to the second hearing alone, and got the entire thing thrown out. The other solicitor winked at me as he left. Saved me about $9K. Nice chap. I had a misdemeanor possession case I was defending. Client was driving his mom's car. He gets pulled over for playing the stereo too loud. There are pills in the center console, in a prescription pill bottle. The bottle has his mom's name on it. Client gets arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. Case is obviously bull, and the dumbest DA I've ever met in my life won't dismiss. We go to trial. During closing arguments, the DA says, "This case is a circumstantial evidence case." During my closing, I slap the jury instruction on the projector and say that if a case is based on circumstantial evidence and there is one factual scenario that points to guilt and one that points to innocence, the jury must find in favor of the defendant and acquit. My client was acquitted. This seems like a really nasty move from the cop that arrested this kid. None of this needed to ever happen. When I first started, my firm had me on a case where the client claimed he lost because of ineffective assistance of counsel, basically saying that the old lawyer didn't do his job. So we prepare an argument based on not asking the right questions, not communicating, etc. We think it's going to be a tough case, but not unwinnable. Then we get the response to our complaint where the old lawyer argues that he was only ineffective because he didn't have time to prepare for the case, and only reviewed it the morning of the original trial. He had known about the case for months, by the way. The judge saw this, and during the trial, we had essentially asked, "Isn't this the definition of ineffective counsel? Not giving enough time to your client?" The silence from his side of the court was amazing. Needless to say, the trial didn't last much longer than that. Thanks, opposing counsel. I guess you were ineffective for both of you. I once had a district attorney indicate to the court that if defense counsel had included this argument in his motions, it would possibly be a valid argument. I interrupted him with the page number and heading where it was located. I was an attorney for the estate of a husband defending against claims for money by the separate estate of a wife over proceeds from the sale of a business back in 1996. Both husband and wife died in 2010. Suit was filed in early 2011. Went to trial in 2014. Wife got around 10% of the business in 1996. Husband got the rest. He had built and operated it for 35 years prior to marriage and sold it 7 years into the marriage. The whole case hinged on whether the valuation of the business in 1996 was reasonable or not. We say, you can't value a business 15 years later with all the documents gone and all the main people in the business dead or missing. They say they have enough info to show the 1996 valuation should have been higher. Opposing counsels get a big-time expert to testify that the business sold of $45 million based on a valuation, but should have sold for $70 million, and the husband hid $25 million in real estate in the transaction. We get that testimony and then realize the 1996 valuation of the business was done by the same expert. This is absolutely the most perfect catch-22 I have ever seen. So now we ask, okay, so was your valuation wrong in 1996 or is it wrong now? Expert says his 1996 valuation was right based on the information he had in 1996, but his valuation now is more correct, which then bears the question, what kind of information do you have now that you didn't have in 1996?
I don't know. I don't have my file from 1996. Nobody keeps documents that long.
And despite this lack of records, his valuation is somehow more correct now. Judge basically said the expert was talking out of both sides of his butt and we won. When I first started practicing, I handled a custody case where my client, mom, had a problem with dad smoking around the kids. I asked him if he regularly smoked around the kids, to which he replied that he doesn't smoke tobacco, only weed in the house. Obviously, this raised eyebrows as it is illegal in my state. He then went into a long diatribe about how he only follows the law of the streets. He actually said this, and doesn't recognize the authority of the court he was currently in front of. Needless to say, mom got full custody, especially after dad was arrested for going to the court service officer's house late at night and trying to kick her door in. My public defender wife was trying a case where the defendant was accused of filling fraudulent prescriptions. Now, keep in mind that public defenders deal with a lot of shady characters who maintain their innocence with increasingly implausible stories as the evidence gets worse. So you can get a bit jaded after a while, but you don't have to believe your client's story to represent them vigorously. So the prosecution has grainy surveillance video of someone who looks like the defendant getting the prescription filled and the ID used to fill it, which belongs to the defendant. Defendant maintains that someone stole his ID and is using it because they look similar, and never reported the ID as stolen. My wife is skeptical that the jury will go for that, but she's always willing to go to trial if that's what the client wants. So preps that defense and heads into trial. Prosecutor brings in the pharmacist who reported the prescription issue, goes through the usual routine of establishing who she is, where she works, was this ID used that day, etc. Finally, the prosecutor asks the pharmacist if the person who attempted to fill the prescription that day is in the courtroom. No. Oops. My opposing counsel made some off-the-cuff remarks about how their client had to go to another remote office to get all the records they wanted to use against my client. That let me know the witness they were trying to use to introduce the records as evidence wasn't actually familiar with the records or the records-keeping process. In the jurisdiction we were in, records were exemption to hearsay rule, but you needed someone familiar with the creation and maintenance of the records to get them admitted. I attacked the witness's qualifications to get the records admitted and ended up getting the records excluded. I then made a motion for a directed verdict on the grounds they couldn't prove the case without the records, and won, all because the opposing counsel complained that their witnesses had to go way out of their way to get the records for the court. I had a hearing where the opposing party offered an updated contract that my client supposedly signed, except it was a horrible copy and barely readable. Then he assured the judge that the new contract was exactly the same as the old contract, except for the party name at the top. The original contract was in his mom's name, the new one in his name, and the date of the contract itself. He made that assurance multiple times. After he exhausted himself saying how everything was the same, I pointed out to the judge that half the provisions were different and that my client had never signed that form. The judge asked if we were really accusing him of forging my client's signature, since that's a serious accusation. I held up the guy's prior conviction for contract fraud and said, "I absolutely am, Your Honor. We won. Hands down, no further argument needed." I was about 5 when this happened, but my parents explained it years later. There was a series of trees on the sidewalk in front of each house on the street. Although they were not part of our yard, the tree was owned by my parents and they were responsible for it. Some guy tripped over a branch and was seriously injured. He came after my parents for all of the money. The dude showed up with a mountain of evidence: hospital bills, psychologist testimonials, a photo montage of his slow and painful recovery, etc. Apparently, his lawyer brandished this stuff like a bat before court. My parents' lawyer thought he had a good case, until the first day of court, when he walked over with a picture and asked, "Is this your tree?" My parents looked at the photo in disbelief. "No, that's actually not our tree." The opposing counsel repeated the question. It went back and forth a few times until my parents' lawyer incredulously provided a picture of their tree, which was, even to the untrained eye, a completely different tree. At that point, the opposing counsel whirled around and started screaming at his client, "You said it was their tree!" Case summarily dismissed. My parents walked out in shock, came home, and bought me ice cream. All's well that ends well. Plaintiff was claiming insurance money because he accidentally chopped off his fingers while cutting bamboo with a machete, and the insurance company, our client, refused to pay the insured amount. During the hearing, the plaintiff attorney began to demonstrate with a rolled up sheet of paper how his client was cutting the bamboo when the accident happened. No matter how he tried, he could not reproduce the position of the fingers with the alleged cut of the machete. The only possible match would be if the plaintiff had deliberately extended his fingers over a plane surface and hacked his own fingers. Based on this disastrous performance, the judge determined an expert opinion was needed and later dismissed the case due to deliberate self-mutilation. Parents were being sued by their landlord, and parents had a countersuit against him. Parents were moving across country and found this house to rent. They did a walkthrough and everything looks great. Landlord wants first, last, security, and $1,500 because they had a dog and 2 cats. Fine. It was somewhere in the $8,000 to $9,000 range. No big deal for them. They're set to move in on a Monday, so my mom flies in on Saturday to do one final look over, sign the contract, and get the key. Perfect. They are now the tenants. Monday, they arrive, and the house house is trashed. The landlord has moved a bunch of his stuff into the garage, shed, and one of the bedrooms. There's stool in the toilet, pee on the floor, garbage laying everywhere, used condoms. I can't really do this justice, but my mom took pictures and videos throughout the entire house. She calls the landlord and tells him they are not moving in with the house in this condition. He tells her to clean the house and he'll buy the first tank of oil for the house. It was empty. Tells her to do it or he's keeping all of the money for breach of contract. A lot of back and forth happens and ton of harassing texts and phone calls from him. Court day comes and everyone's ready to submit their evidence in front of the judge. Parents have photos, texts, the contract, videos. Landlord only has a contract. But his contract is different than my parents'. He's included a section that states they permit him access to the house for his storage needs, and that the tenant is responsible for all on-site cleanup and maintenance after accepting the key. The best part was that the date of the signatures on his contract was the date they moved in, not the date my mom flew in and signed. Judge tells the landlord he's a special level of stupid, and then the judge's final remarks were about how disrespectful the landlord was to show up in shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and flip-flops in his courtroom. He never paid a dime, then claimed bankruptcy, and started a business under a different name. 2 years later, I went to his house, let out all but 19 PSI from all of his tires, and superglued the caps on the valve stems. I do only civil litigation. You would think it would generally be a battle against equals, professionals versus professionals. It's not. I face a fair amount of parties representing themselves pro se, often otherwise smart people who wouldn't think to do their own plumbing or operate on their own appendix, but have no qualms about appearing in court on their own behalf. Surprisingly, they don't know what they're doing. One of my favorites from a deposition:
"We didn't pay Company X's invoices because we heard they were going through bankruptcy."
A, they weren't, and B, it wouldn't be a valid defense to non-payment if they had been. It happens more often than you would think. One attorney that people continue to hire, Brian, is sort of a legend. As opposing counsel 4 times in 6 years, he's lost cases against my firm where he could have won. This is civil litigation, but the guy has a knack for spoiling his momentum. One in particular, the evidence pointed that our client was at fault and we were asked to settle. Brian introduced a witness and voicemail to the record. We had no knowledge of these and asked to review. Upon review, we were confused as the voicemail had nothing to do with proving their case, and made the plaintiff look like a lunatic. It was full of incoherent rambling and swearing. We allowed the exhibits to be entered and they went over as we expected, and we won the counterclaim. A guy ended up taking my family to court basically because he'd been dating my mother and things ended. So he then takes us to small claims court with an itemized list of everything he'd ever bought the entire family. Every cheeseburger, every Kit Kat. He even billed for things he did, like house repairs. Some of the repairs were terrible and ruined other things. He tried to unclog the sink and ended up destroying the main drain pipe for the house. Now, he had bought some more expensive things as well. No one asked him to, but he was one of the types that loved to show how much money he had and would always talk about his connections and would name drop someone anytime we went anywhere. So when he takes us to court with his full itemized list, the judge asks him to go first to present his testimony. He basically says, "While I was with them, I bought all this stuff. I took them to dinner all the time and all this, but it was the idea it would be paid back by them." Judge, you bought a child a birthday cake with the idea it would be paid back? Did you ever say that these things were loans and not gifts? Him, well, no, but I shouldn't need to. That's the normal way people think. Judge, well, that's not the way I'd think. Case dismissed. I didn't prosecute this case, but I saw it. The state was prosecuting an individual for reckless conduct with a deadly weapon and criminal threatening with a deadly weapon. It was a bench trial because the defendant was a foreigner, and I guess the defendant was concerned that a jury would be biased against him. Essentially, the state alleged that the defendant waved a gun at 2 employees of a Dairy Queen and then discharged the gun in the air. The defendant was the manager of the Dairy Queen. So at the start of the case, the state requested a continuance because it could not produce the 2 employees. They had been subpoenaed but didn't show. The judge denied the continuance, so the state decided to go forward. It put on its case but wasn't able to introduce any testimony that the defendant brandished the gun at the employees or that he had discharged it near them. There were admissions that he had a gun that night, which he had shown to other people, and testimony that the gun had been discharged. State rests. Defense does not move to dismiss and calls the defendant to the stand. I was watching in the gallery with some public defenders because trials were uncommon in that county. We immediately begin whispering to each other about how he didn't make the motion to dismiss at halftime. The defendant testifies about how he wanted to scare the two employees as a joke. Then, on cross, he testifies how he brandished the gun and what angle he was holding it when he fired. Defense rests. The judge had the longest delivery of verdict that I have ever heard. He said something to the effect of, "It's rare that you find a defendant that convicts himself by his own testimony, but that is what happened here. Without the testimony regarding the gun and the discharge, there would be insufficient evidence to convict." He goes on and on. While the judge was delivering the verdict, the defendant was standing, obviously. He faints and slams his head on the defendant's table. He ultimately was taken out of the courtroom on a stretcher and transported to a local hospital. There was blood all over the floor. The defense attorney, who was in his mid-60s, looked like he needed medical attention too. This would have been an instant ineffective assistance of counsel, but he was immediately deported, which is the main reason he went to trial, because he was also a convicted felon, though not charged with felon in possession in this case. And INS was only waiting for the conviction to deport him, so he was sent back to his home country. This was the most messed up thing I've seen in court, and have seen some wild stuff. I felt bad for the attorney, but ultimately contacted lawyers' assistants about him because I saw him do other things that were almost as bad. As a prosecutor, I was worried about his clients, who were paying him for the most part as the court was no longer appointing cases to him, and his ability to effectively represent them. Doctors have read it? What was a symptom a patient didn't mention that was really important? 16-year-old came in with blood pressure of 60/30, pale as a ghost, tons of free fluid in his abdomen on ultrasound. Turns out he had a metastatic testicular cancer that had eroded into his aorta and was bleeding into his belly. Come to find out later, he had testicle lumps and was too scared to tell anyone. I had a guy come to the hospital who told me he had seizures every Tuesday like clockwork. This is highly unusual for somebody with a seizure disorder. It wasn't until I asked him about his social history that he told me he's a heavy drinker. I further investigated, and it turns out he binge drinks Thursday, Friday, Saturday every week, then stops cold turkey. He was having withdrawal seizures. Black stools. Folks, if you're having black poops, for God's sake, mention that sooner rather than later. This lady had been seeing nothing but black for months before she thought to mention anything. We found several gastric ulcers and a hemoglobin level that circled the drain. Medical intern here. Had a woman come to ER complaining about stomach pain. Took her full history, did the exam and vitals. She seemed fine, mild fever. Made a preliminary diagnosis of gastrointestinus and presented to my doctor. My doctor, who's female, goes to her and asks why she came to the ER for something so mild. She says because she noticed blood in her stool. The doc comes out and asks me if I asked about her stool. I did, and she said it was fine. And I asked specifically about blood. She goes back in and asks the patient why she didn't mention that to me, and her response, "I didn't think it was appropriate to say it to a male intern." Turns out she had ulcerative colitis, needed a colonoscopy and long-term medical therapy and possibly surgery. Guys, when it comes to medical professionals, don't feel the need to be ashamed. I can almost guarantee they have seen or heard way worse than whatever you have to tell them. I had a patient whose main complaint was a wrist sprain. Asked how he fell, and he said he felt lightheaded and fell down the stairs. After about 15 minutes of questions about his heart and other stuff, I asked him if he's had any vomiting. He said he vomits every day. I ask if it's red, and he says it's bright red every time. The kicker is, this was his usual yearly appointment. Dude was vomiting blood every day, and not only did not go to the ER, he didn't feel it was worth mentioning at his checkup. Chest pain. Guy denied ever having chest pain. Ever. Told us he was able to chop wood and work on his land without any issues. He didn't meet any criteria for additional workup prior to surgery. During his major surgery, he had a huge heart attack. A cardiac cath showed that he basically had one very narrow coronary artery that was the only thing getting blood to his heart. His daughters, who were nurses, all swore up and down that he was healthy as a horse and never complained of heart issues. Then his black sheep other daughter arrived and said he actually had told her that he has terrible exertional chest pain every time he did anything, but that he didn't want his daughters to know because they would worry. He died a few days later. If we had known about his symptoms, he would have likely had his cardiac disease diagnosed and treated prior to surgery. I had a patient who needed a small sterile procedure done but had a latex allergy, and it was in bright red all over her chart. We used paper charts back then. We had just ran out of latex-free sterile gloves. I went in to tell her she needed to come back in a week when we got them back. Then I decided to ask what happened when she came into contact with latex. Her response? I get chlamydia. I'm sorry. What? What is this story? Is this woman serious? Did my sub-I on a level 1 trauma ED a few years ago as a 4th-year med student. Homeless guy with Hep B, Hep C, and HIV came in talking about a rash on his shoulder. How it hurt, had been pretty hot out, and that was where he was slinging his bag on. Looked okay, figured it was for a sweat rash, he was really in there for food, so was going to give him some cream and a sandwich and send him out the door. Was about to leave when I looked at his chief complaint again, and it also had testicular pain. So I asked him what was going on with his testicles. Lifts up the gown, and he has a tracking abscess through his scrotal skin and through one of his testicles. It was like a worm burrowing through an apple.
Oh, I guess it's okay.
Ended up calling urology and infectious disease, and the guy ended up leaving against medical advice because we were making him NPO without food in anticipation of surgery. I'm a med student, and on my family medicine rotation, I was sent to see this woman before the doctor and get a history and physical. She was saying she was having heartburn and just wanted us to give her something to throw up so she would feel better. I thought it was odd, and so I went through some more review questions, and she said her reflux pain was extending up the left side of her neck and down her left arm, and that she'd been sweating for hours. I cut off my interview short there and went to my teaching doctor to tell him everything and what I thought. Got an EKG. Yeah, she was having a heart attack. Had to call an ambulance and get her to the ER. Had a guy who was sent in because his family was concerned about him, mainly because he was getting into a lot of physical altercations. Appointment with the patient was normal. He was able to talk himself out of most issues his family stated were occurring. And as we were ending, he said he had to pick up his other truck from the shop. I asked him, "Oh, you own 2 trucks?" He replied, "I own 5 trucks." The guy was military and only made 60 to 70K a year. Come to find out, he had bipolar disorder, and in his manic episodes, he would just take out a large loan to buy a new truck. He had almost 120K in debt in just trucks. If it wasn't for that last part of him mentioning he was getting his truck, I would have sent him home and probably never known he had a psychiatric issue. Saw a patient during a follow-up for a gynecological cancer. She said she felt great. Exam was normal. She was relieved, but she was so anxious it set off my medical spider sense, so to speak. I decided to push a bit further, which led to this conversation. So, you said you felt good? Absolutely nothing else bothering you? Oh, you know, some small things. Nothing having anything to do with this. Well, why don't you tell me anyway? Well, I kind of have this weird lump on my belly. A sweat gland or greasy nodule or something. Doesn't really bother me, but I might get a dermatologist to have a look at it if it ever needs to be removed. Ah, I see. Could you show it to me? She showed me, and I saw a skin metastasis, clear as day. Don't know how the story ended because I moved to different service immediately after. But if I had to guess, her life expectancy was probably measured in months. Admitted a baby my intern year that had transferred to our facility for persistent vomiting following a surgery on a part of the intestinal tract. The transferring facility had wanted us to start the baby on a form of intravenous nutrition and offhandedly mentioned some low-grade laboratory abnormalities that they had attributed to the baby just having had surgery. I go into the room in the middle of the night, the first representative of our medical team to meet the family, and in the process of gathering the history, ask the family what color the baby's poop was. The family replied that it was white or gray and had been since birth, and that they just thought that's how it should be. Record scratch. Big red flag. We ultimately diagnosed the baby with a rare genetic disorder that required an organ transplant. A few months ago, a woman, 36 years old, consulted to endocrinology because she was getting fat without a change in her diet and she felt different. Asking more questions, she casually mentioned she hadn't had her menstruation for months and that maybe she was menopausic. At 36, we suggested that she might be pregnant and she said it was a stupid idea and that she knew she was not pregnant. We did some analysis and ecography and yep, 35 weeks pregnant. You give birth at around 40. I was once rounding on a patient in the morning that had come in for a stroke. I decided to ask some basic review of the symptoms questions just out of habit, and when I asked about changes in vision, he said yes. I probed further and he told me that he was using eye drops for something, but that he forgot his eye drops at home 3 days ago when he came to the hospital. For the last 3 days, the vision in his left eye was worsening along with eye pain and pressure. When I called his pharmacy to see what drops he was using, as I suspected, they were for glaucoma, and he was having worsening vision loss due to untreated glaucoma, increasing his intraocular pressure. We got a no pathology consult stat. Medic here ran a call to a general sick person call and arrived to find a slender lady in her 80s. She wasn't feeling well and her granddaughter finally called 911. We run through our assessment and aren't finding much to go on. And then, me. Anything happened recently, like a fall or a trip or something like that?
Well, I fell a few days ago and hit my head, but I wasn't feeling bad until a couple hours ago.
Oh, okay. And you took all of your meds since the fall?
Well, no, I didn't take them yesterday, just today.
This morning, like usual?
Well, no, I took them around 2 hours ago.
Including the blood thinner? Oh, shnikes. Yelled to the other guys to grab the gurney. I didn't even need her to answer. I knew exactly what was happening the second she told me she took her meds right before she started feeling off. Subdural bleed. Didn't even matter how fast we drove. And we drove fast. She lost consciousness shortly after we got to the ER and probably never regained it. The blood thinner accelerated the bleed and she expired from it. It was such a terrible situation. Her granddaughter was really confused and scared at the sudden shift in our demeanor. It was such a large bleed and textbook case presentation that it was used as a case study for our quality improvement training. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I had an elderly gentleman come in because he fell in his kitchen. Didn't lose consciousness or anything. Didn't have any signs of trauma, but both eyes were slightly swollen, which he had said happened before the fall. Oh, and he forgot to tell me he also had a sore throat. He wouldn't have even brought it up if I hadn't asked why his voice sounded a little muffled. Took a close look at his throat. He had some pretty significant pharyngeal edema. He ended up having what's called angioedema, which explains the throat and eye swelling. Different from an allergic reaction. He ended up getting intubated and sedated and went to the ICU to protect his airway. He initially came in because of a completely inconsequential fall and got intubated and admitted to the ICU because of an "oh, by the way, doc" moment. Not a people doctor, but I worked as a vet tech for 3 years. Had a little tiny mini shih tzu in horrible health with a nasty attitude to match. You could seriously barely touch the dog, and she was very, very sick. The only reason we were able to do anything for her was because she was so small. The owner comes to visit her one afternoon and casually mentions to us that she's deaf. Poor thing was scared out of her mind and did remarkably better once we learned to let her know we were there before touching her. As a primary care doctor, we try to keep to our tight schedules. It can be difficult when patients could come in with something complex or with a shopping list of things that they want to talk about. And balancing this with providing good care and being mindful that the next patient will be waiting in 15 minutes for their appointment, we can be notorious for being late for these reasons. I saw a patient the other day who said she had a runny nose. I just got on with it, made sure she didn't have any signs of a more serious illness, and gave her some advice on what to do. After that, she also had a pain in her ankle she quickly wanted checked out. I couldn't find much wrong and assured her it would probably be okay in a couple days. Now her 15 minutes is up and I'm kinda gesturing her that we're finished. Then she pauses and says, "Okay, I just wanted to get those things checked out. The main reason I'm here is that I've been having chest pain all morning." God, I face-palmed. I had a patient come in with a neck mass. There was enough off that he got the beginnings of a malignancy and infection workup that was remarkable for the mass being a hematoma. Then he remembered he was in a car accident and the seatbelt was where said mass was. I was discharging an elderly man in a wheelchair who had been treated for a urinary tract infection. At the end of the conversation, I suddenly realized, somewhat embarrassingly, that nothing in his papers told me why he was in a wheelchair. So I asked, "Why are you in a wheelchair?"
Because I can't walk.
He answered, "Well, fine, but why can't you walk?"
I don't know.
Okay, how long have you been in a wheelchair?
Since I was admitted last Sunday.
Okay. At some point, everybody in health experiences how difficult it can be to get information from patients. A good tip is to ask specific questions. So I followed up with, Did you have any problems walking a month ago?
Oh, no problems. I went for daily walks.
At this point, I had to get up and do a neurological exam, and found almost total loss of motoric and sensoric function in the lower extremities. Turns out he had a metastatic cancer compressing his spinal cord, and since he hadn't mentioned his quickly deteriorating legs, he had just been put in a wheelchair at admission with no further questions asked. As a kid, I was always out of breath and could hardly do any physical activity. When I would run or laugh hard or go up the stairs, my arms and legs would tingle. Thought I mentioned that to my parents a few times, but at the doctor, all that was ever said was I wasn't very active. Ended up passing out in gym class at age 8 and being diagnosed with a cardiovascular problem about a month before it would have killed me. The tingling and dizziness should have been a good clue. Not so much a symptom, but a medication missing from their health records that produced symptoms of poor bone grafting. In my dental office, and basically any dental office, we ask you to fill out a health history form and sign it. We'll again ask you at x-rays about any medications or health concerns. We will again ask you about what medications you're taking before any procedures. We will ask you again each and every time you visit the office, even if we just saw you yesterday as your last appointment. This man came in for several implants. This has multiple stages, which means multiple visits. We asked countless times upon each visit about his health records, health history, and medication. Nothing. Okay, that's great. But guess who had many failed implants, pain, and bone issues develop? Every implant failed. We only found out what the heck was going on when we were scratching our heads trying to understand why a healthy person was having bone problems, and asked him if it was fine for us to contact his physician, and from his physician we found out about his medication and made the connections right away. The medication he was on greatly prevents proper bone health. We would have changed our entire treatment plan if he had mentioned his medication he was taking. We even explained the treatment plan several times and asked if there were health problems so many times, and he stated no health problems. At least if he had stated a health problem, we could have researched what medications are used for it and prevented issues. He required bone grafting, and proper bone health is imperative. He spent thousands and then blamed us. He's forcing our doctor to do thousands of free work on damages because of his mistake. So much money, pain, and problems could have been prevented if this man just told us what damn pill he fed himself each night before bed. I'm an EMS worker, and one day my 62-year-old neighbor calls me up and tells me to bring my blood pressure thingy. She's a retired cop and one of the coolest people you'll ever hope to meet. She's also stubborn as a mule, so I'm thinking immediately that if she's asking me for a once-over, things are not swell. So I head up with my cuff and stethoscope and ask her what's up. She tells me she's felt off for a few days, dizzy at odd times and exhausted. I take her blood pressure as she's sitting in her chair, and it's fairly normal, but she's still acting off. Her eyes are red-rimmed, she's pale, and then I notice a bruise on her chin. I ask her about it. She tells me about getting up to go to the bathroom the night before, and the last thing she recalled was walking back into her bedroom. She woke up later on the floor. In my world, that's just cause for a ride in our Weep-Whoop mobile. But again, we're not dealing with your average little old lady. So I'm essentially now trying to convince her gently that she needs a doctor's opinion. I did a couple of quick tests to rule out a stroke, and she passed with flying colors. I do a postural, where someone goes from sitting to standing and you check their blood pressure to see if they're compensating, and she's down a solid 20 points, but is of course playing it down as not a big deal. As we're negotiating, I tell her, look, you wouldn't call me up here for nothing, so we need to figure this out. Then it finally comes out. She's had dark and tarry stools and vomit. Well, that was the end of negotiation. Ambulance was called and she was rushed to the ER, where she was immediately given a blood transfusion because of a massive GI bleed. I'm still surprised her blood pressure was within normal ranges both times, but I've chalked it up to the amount of vinegar she has in her. Guys, I had to say Weep-Whoop mobile like 15 times because I couldn't say it without laughing. Nurse here. Had a man come in complaining of urinary retention, which could be because of his age. He left out the weakness and numbness in his legs that had been going on for almost a month during all of his assessments. These assessments were by both doctors, urologists, and nurses. He always denied any other symptoms besides urinary retention. He suddenly stopped being able to feel or move below his belly button. MRI of his back showed cancer into his spinal column, and he died 8 months later. So, triage nurse doing phone triage. Member had high blood pressure, 180/90, due to not taking blood pressure pills. This was not outside her unmedicated baseline. I asked if she was having shortness of breath or chest pain. She said no. Booked her a same-day appointment after talking with her provider. She was having a heart attack with both chest pains and breathing issues when she came to her appointment. Don't lie, people, seriously. I don't understand why you would seek out medical attention and then not be honest about the symptoms that you're having. You're not doing yourself any favors. You clearly came here for a reason. Speak up. Exhaustion. Not just being really tired at the end of the day, but unable to function exhaustion. I would wake up in the morning and then 2 hours later need to take a nap that would sometimes last until 3 or 5 in the afternoon. I told my doctor and she ran blood tests, thinking it was my thyroid, but nothing came back abnormal. I was 29 years old. She kind of shrugged and figured it was hormones. A few months later, I noticed rectal bleeding. Went back to the doctor to be told it was hemorrhoids and just waited out. Turns out it was stage 3 rectal cancer. I was cancer-free for almost 3 years until it reappeared in my lung. Now I'm stage 4 and about to begin immunotherapy. I'm lucky because my disease is regulated to only a tiny spot, and I have a rare mutation that qualifies me for immunotherapy, but it's still an absolutely terrifying situation. Feeling extremely tired all the time is one of the first notable symptoms of some cancers. Please don't let your doctors ignore it. Kind of tying back to what one of our previous posters said, unfortunately, yes, a lot of the times these doctors are on a tight schedule and need to get to their next patient as quickly as possible. It's not that they don't care or aren't looking close enough, it's just that they feel a lot of stress due to their time constraints. And especially with something like exhaustion, I feel like it's very easy to go unnoticed. We all have to be careful and keep an eye out for ourselves. If you feel like something is wrong, talk to your doctor.
Ugly dudes with hot wives. How did you do it? By being hot when I was younger. I've aged horribly while my wife has aged like fine wine. I feel you. My last 3 years, I've aged like 10 years. I've avoided aging for so long. My wife keeps getting prettier. Men also don't do the daily upkeep that most straight women do. That could account for it. I laughed at that last comment because it seems like that person thinks that gay women don't have a skin routine. Hell, I've seen gay men with better skin than some women. Smoke and mirrors. She thinks I'm hot, but it's all confidence and superficial charm. It's been 21 years and I've been white-knuckling this whole relationship hoping she doesn't notice that I'm a fat dork. I stalked your profile. You're a pretty handsome dude. Nice beard, man. You and your wife look great together. Thanks, she's got a banging body and puts her right out of my league, but she won't let me post those pics as proof. I think Pete Davidson has shown everyone that looks don't matter when it comes to getting women. And that's not me talking crap. He has a joke about it. I believe my wife is damn near blind. Wow, this has actually never really occurred to me, but my best relationship I ever had was with a gal who was just shy of being legally blind. I've never really thought about it much. Pretty much been single ever since. Time for you to start hanging out in the Braille section of the library, my dude. My wife has no depth perception and has pretty bad eyesight. The only logical reason is because she can't see me. Now get out of my swamp. In your pictures, I see someone with a lively face and laughing eyes. You look kind enough and your comment tells me you're very humorous. The picture you chose of her and your comment both tell me that you're caring and appreciative towards her. I think you all overestimate the importance of socially accepted good looks. I admit that being actively ugly might be a hindrance, but otherwise it's not really that important. As they say, good looks get you in the door, personality makes them stay and happy. I like to think of it like this. Good looks matter for a lot of hookups, but for actual relationships, personality is far more important. Six-pack abs don't matter as much as good communication skills, the ability to stay calm under pressure, and the willingness to compromise with your partner. I wholeheartedly agree with that last comment. Good-looking people destroy when it comes to the dating scene, but ask them how many good or healthy relationships they've had. If you need more evidence, just look at Hollywood relationships. My wife has terrible taste. If I'm being honest, my wife's gotten hotter over the last 25 years, and I've gotten old. I think her secret is a great skincare routine, exercise, and good genes. I was in high school when that whole Wear Sunscreen song came out in the late 90s. I took that song to heart, wore it every day, and I'm now in my 40s. I'm glad I did. I make her laugh and give great hugs. Great hugs are such an underrated skill. I have a girthy, and I mean massively good sense of humor. Just reading that made me wet, because I snorted while drinking. I blew a load of my coffee all over the table. These comments were small, but they got the job done. My wife told me I have a great sense of humor and can always brighten her day with it. She also said that I really listen to her when we talk. I definitely married up. I actually don't know. It can't be money because my job is one of the worst paying jobs in our country. It's something like 98.5% of full-time jobs make more than mine. And it can't be because of having a huge member, because mine is way below average. If I had to guess, maybe it's because I'm funny, like I think that I'm honest, like way too honest. I don't make much money and have an average PP. Quotes from a man you can trust. You pay attention to the bits other men don't typically pay attention to. My wife last week. She told me to say that I know the motion of the ocean, but as a real answer, I pay attention to the small things. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. We have good communication. I try my best to make her feel loved. I never pressure her into anything, and we encourage each other to keep improving. If we fight, we resolve it pretty quickly, because we're both able to apologize and recognize our fault. It's just about being able to say, hey, I love you and I want to talk this through because I know that we can figure it out together. We've probably had 2 or 3 big fights in our relationship, but we've always sat down and talked about it, warts and all. Spoken like a man that knows the meaning of a relationship. My friend is a short, overweight, dwarven-looking man and has a really hot girlfriend. It's all charisma. I used to run with a guy like that too. He was about 5'6" and over 200 pounds, so short and pudgy. He made okay money, but certainly wasn't rich. Yet he was always with someone you would consider to be way out of his league. How did he manage it? I figure he had 2 things going for him. 1, the guy was genuinely funny. If you're hanging around with this guy, he will keep you laughing nonstop. And 2, confidence. He'll talk to anyone, and if you shoot him down, he'll just chat up your friend without missing a beat. This kind of describes me, but also you would be surprised. There's plenty of women, like my GF, who find short, overweight, dwarven-looking men very attractive. My GF is taller than me and rubs my hairy belly in bed just like I'm a king. And she's quite hot. I like men of all heights, but my ex-husband was shorter than me and my current partner is only a little taller than me. I don't understand the need to have a large, tall man. I'm not looking for a father figure. Lots of wonderful men get overlooked because of this. There's gold in them hills out there, ladies. Part of me feels like this post was made by hobbits. Got a short, overweight, balding friend. We literally call him George Costanza. He's just confident, enthusiastic, and always doing something because he takes his hobbies seriously. His girlfriend seems the opposite, even though she's a smoke show. So it was partly a lucky find, but he also clearly adds substance to anyone's life he's in. He also comes from a very wealthy family, if you need that information. I feel like the wealthy family info is a double-edged sword because on one hand, people will automatically think, oh, she's a gold digger. But then on the other hand, it sucks for those women that are genuinely into a person and not for the money. They get overlooked. How men make us feel while we're in their presence is crucial. Sometimes by virtue of the fact that the guy showing you the attention is hot, you'll feel attractive simply because logic dictates that he could exclusively be chatting up hot women if he wants to be. So he must think you're hot. That rush of emotion wears off real quick if he's got absolutely nothing going on apart from his looks. Doubly fast if he's an arrogant jerk. As multiple people are and have always been saying, if you make us laugh and are pleasant, you're going to make us feel like the most beautiful, captivating woman in the room. That's not a high we want to come down from. Make them laugh, treat them well. Do fun stuff together, do chores, admit when you're wrong, give compliments without prompting, learn what they do and don't like, then put that knowledge to work. Have a handle on your own psychology so you can deal with your own business. Listen twice as much as you talk. This is true. I spent an hour talking to my husband about a book I finished today. I know he wasn't completely interested, but he listened, asked questions, and was engaged. It's the sexiest thing in the world that he cares enough about me just to let me ramble and poorly explain why I love this book. I won't lie to you, when I can have a deep, thoughtful conversation with a woman, it is one of the sexiest things in the world. You know those guys who brag about finishing a pudding cup without a spoon? Well, I can clean out a peanut butter jar. No idea why he's so successful with the ladies, he says, sitting at the end of the bar licking his eyebrows. Let me tell you guys, you're gonna wanna start off like a butterfly landing on a flower and finish like a bulldog eating oatmeal. I like oatmeal. I'm not ugly, but I got a woman way hotter than me to marry me. Turns out, if you have a good personality and are slightly interesting, then you can get away with being a 5. But, the internet tells me that women only want alpha bros with muscles and money that make their bed every morning. Wait a minute. Do we really think that alpha bros make their bed every morning? Unless we think all alpha males are the American Psycho type. I'll give my perspective from the other side. My boyfriend isn't classically handsome. His hairline is receding and the man is a beanpole and somewhat effeminate. Exactly who Andrew Tate claims will never get a woman. But I'm obsessed with him and I'm so glad and proud that he's mine. Why is that? He listens when I talk. He cleans up after himself. He's funny and insightful and above all, kind. He cooks, he's terrible at it, but he tries hard. He's like the most gentle man I've ever met, and because of that, I don't feel the fear I've felt around most other men in my life. My cats love him, he feeds me, he apologizes when he's wrong, and I feel secure enough to admit when I'm wrong too. We talk out every problem as a us versus the problem instead of a me versus him. He gives me space when I need it, and attention when I need it too. We just respect each other. Those things aren't hard, but he's the first to check all those boxes. He's 100 out of 10 for me, and I'll grow old and die happily with him. I'll add on to this. My husband is more than a decade older than I am. He has a receding hairline when we met and was working 2 jobs. Our sense of humor is the same, so is our sense of justice. Our dark sides match, and he's great at housework. Then came the hookups. Oh my god, we matched there too. It was over for me. I fell in love. It's still those same qualities that make every day happy and full of laughter. You can't survive the pitfalls of life without being able to laugh. Beauty fades, hair falls out, and wrinkles form. Let's keep spreading the love for good men. My fiance is average to everyone but me. He's overweight, goofy, awkward, and kinda dumb. I say this lovingly, I'm also dumb. Think of the last 2 brain cells meme? That's us. He also makes me laugh every single day. Our childlike qualities align perfectly to keep us happy and well maintained. So we can be goofy idiots all day with each other, and it's fantastic. He embraces my mean streak that comes out playfully, to its full extent, so I can be a little brat. Every flaw I see in myself, he sees as a beauty. He also knows how to handle my mood swings and be so gentle with me on my bad days. He doesn't need to be mothered like many men, loves providing for me, as I do him, and is as sweet as candy. I can't wait to marry him. My husband has been balding since the day we met and it's never bothered me. But damn, he's funny. I made a little joke about a very shocked looking cinder block and he ran with it. We giggled in the car like school kids over a fart. We're both over 30. I have about an extra 20 to 30 pounds and he has a little bit more than that. But when he comes home and hugs me, it's all warm and safe. I've always been one of those guys where people are like, dude, how did you get her? I'm super tall, which probably helps, but I've always been overweight. I'm not exactly sloth. Look up the Goonies, youngsters, you're welcome. But I'm not Marlon Brando either. I'm highly average looking, I do pretty well financially, but you wouldn't know that if you looked at me, my truck, or home, and when I got my wife, I was broke AF. I always tell them that it isn't that hard. Treat them like people you value and respect. Listen to them, take an interest in them and the things that are important to them. Put in some genuine effort and show them you care. It's easier and more effective to constantly do little things to show her how you care than always trying to prove it with some big gesture. Then just take care of yourself. Good hygiene, keep your house and ride clean, have a couple of genuine interests and hobbies. It makes you more interesting and a well-rounded person. Learn to cook. No woman wants a man-child who can't properly feed himself, and I've not met a woman yet that doesn't like a man that can cook. I personally would like to add, don't listen to douchebags. Andrew Tate is the latest one of these, but there's always some popular famous one at any given time. My husband and I met in college. What made me choose him over more conventionally attractive men who were interested in me at the time? He was extremely honest. When we talked, he listened and responded not in a way to try to get with me, but in a way you listen and respond to your best friend. And that's how I knew it was genuine. I don't know how, but I can tell when a guy is trying to prove that he's a good listener for flirty reasons versus actually connecting through the listening. This made me feel so safe and respected. I knew something was different about him. Our very first conversation was about philosophy. By the way, today we've been married for a decade now, and we absolutely laugh like kids together every single day. It sounds stupid, but Bumble. He was from the next town over. I wouldn't normally have talked to him because he didn't put anything on his profile or really fill it out. But something about him seemed kind of like, I don't know, genuine or sweet? I don't know how to explain it. He just turned out to be a bit shy, so it's hard for him to talk about himself to strangers. I'm glad I gave it a shot though. Opposite side here, ugly chick with handsome dude. I let him touch my chesticles. Works 100% of the time. My homie was a nice dude, spent 6 years third wheeling for the fun of it, but in the end glad to see he got married. He said all he did was be funny and things went over time. I feel like the waiting game advice can be bad advice for most men. It's probably better to let your feelings known instead of waiting 6 years and then possibly getting rejected. It being Valentine's Day and all, when my boyfriend and I found each other online, he would make any excuse not to video chat with me. We exchanged pics, he only had 2, but I felt it was necessary to see each other live before meeting. Pics don't show the true person. I was mainly thinking of safety and I was about to bail on him. He sweetly convinced me to be patient and wait to meet in person. I asked why. I thought he was a serial killer or something. He assured me that he wasn't. He simply didn't want my first impression of him to be on video chat. Cautiously, I decided to be patient. We proceeded to text and call each other every day for the next 2 weeks. The texts became love letters and the calls were exciting. I got to know him on a much deeper level, and I thought his voice was so sexy. He made me laugh and he was thoughtful. He was also very kind-hearted, but also very masculine, which I love. He exuded confidence. The chemistry was off the charts. The laughter was constant. When we met for the first time, it didn't matter what he looked like. He was not traditionally handsome by society standards. He was a little overweight, bald, and a bit hunched over. But I think he's gorgeous. He knew exactly what he could offer me and navigated our meeting to allow us to fall in love. Some might think that he was perhaps hiding, but we could have missed out on great love. He is the love of my life. Sometimes he jokes and asks what I see in him, and he calls himself ugly. I remind him of our love story and he smiles. I also remind him that I think he's hot AF. I plan on being his wife one day, because he's the love of my life. Well, it certainly wasn't my pee-pee size or money. Neither of those are worth bragging about. I treated her like a good friend, not an object of infatuation. That caught her attention. I got her to fall in love with me by proving to be well-rounded in my life and very capable. As Red Green would say, if the woman don't find you handsome, make sure they find you handy. Have a sense of humor, especially about yourself, and be comfortable laughing. Listen, clean the house, be kind to animals and service workers. The bar is incredibly, and I mean staggeringly, low. I'm not an ugly guy per se, but I'm stone cold average at best. I'm totally forgettable, but my wife is hot. She's actually attracting attention. She's the kind of woman that men buy things for out of the blue. I listen to her, I share chores with her, I take care of her, I encourage her to do things that make her happy. I spend time with her, and I show interest in the things that she has interest in. Wait, guys are buying things for your wife out of the blue? Yep, she was at the mall with her mother one day, and the guy in line behind her bought her food. A couple of times last year, she had guys at the water park buying her soft drinks. Once she was watching the kids at the pool on vacation, a guy bought popsicles for the kids, shot daggers at me when I walked up and sat beside her. I've long lost count of how many drinks have been bought for her at bars, even once when they realized I was there. Stuff like that. Don't get me started on how often guys come up and just chat with her. Shout out to this guy for just rolling with the punches. I know so many jerks that would get mad at their girls because they're too attractive. Complete idiots. I load the dishwasher instead of leaving my crap in the sink. She finds it hot as hell. I can lick my eyebrows. To be honest, very attractive women sometimes get less attention than you'd think, because guys think that they're just out of their league or something. So the first step to dating anyone is actually putting yourself out there and asking. Nothing's foolproof, but you'd be surprised at the results sometimes, since a lot of guys just self-reject out of being a contender because they don't think they have a shot. That's a huge piece of advice that I've gotten from some more charismatic friends. If you're interested in someone, don't reject yourself. I can honestly say I have objectively the most attractive wife out of my friend group. I was also the one who had no fear at all of rejection. And practice helps to get over those fears. Friend told me back in the day that I went on far more dates than anyone he knew or ever heard of. It doesn't guarantee that the person you fall in love with will be great looking, but if you never talk to anyone, them odds are zero. In regards to the don't reject yourself comment, take that a step further and apply it to everything in life. It will be a huge benefit, trust me. As a longtime restaurant employee, I believe I've seen many cooks and dishwashers unlock the secret. Feed them and agree when they're mad at someone. Honestly, the weight of my heart is definitely through my stomach. My wife is very shy and reserved. I think I was just the only guy that didn't scare her off. I hit the perfect balance of pursuing her and giving her space. Like feeding a wild cat. Until I eventually lured her to a church by the altar. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and her glasses prescription wasn't up to date. Guys that have never been with an attractive woman, and probably not many women in general, will say money. Guys that have been with attractive partners, being funny, treat women with respect, being a decent human being, that's what they do. Yeah, I can confirm, I know plenty of guys that don't have money that have gotten plenty of women. I love these threads because every woman in here is like, he's super nice, he's kind, loves dogs and kids and tips at the restaurant, has a passion for insert benign hobby here, and takes things in stride. He doesn't have a fragile ego and isn't insecure. Just be chill and girls will like you because you aren't dangerous and a liability prone to violence. And the guys in this thread are like, ugh, must be rich, must have a huge wiener. I just have no idea what else it could be because women lie so much and just aren't smart enough to know what they really want. It happens every time. I am very lucky that she was super interested in me from the start. I was just too stupid to notice at first. All worked out in the end. I'm still extremely happy with her. I was just myself and I kept being myself, and that is the key. I see guys pretending to be someone they're not, and that is a big mistake, man. I do think many men overthink that they need to be someone to attract women. At the end of the day, do you want an attractive girlfriend or do you want someone that'll accept you for who you are? If you just be yourself, you might get both. Be good at cooking, your job, and just generally being good at social functions you both agree with. It's called communication. The ways you're good at these things can vary, but generally people are looking, hopefully, for someone who complements your weaknesses, appreciates your strengths, and you can genuinely be at your most comfortable with. My source? Been with my wife for 15 years from ages 21 to 36. My fiance is absolutely stunning, and to be honest, I'm like medium ugly, but I made her laugh like no other man could hope to, and just treated her well and respected her. I've learned to realize that hot women care more about personality than average looking women. I was a late bloomer, went from a 4 on a good day to a 7 or maybe an 8 thanks to genetics and heavy lifting. We get handsome, but holy hell does it not start that way. I met my wife when I was in my early 20s. She was 19. She was one of those girls that just glows, insanely gorgeous. During our first date, I was absolutely certain she was going to just get up and leave. She didn't. After a few days, I asked her why she hadn't run away yet. She said, "I like you for you." She surprised me at work one day by bringing lunch for a picnic, and several of my coworkers said, "How the hell did you land her?" It wasn't money, although I do have a solid career and decent money. In 10 years of marriage, my wife has asked for practically nothing, and she's as anti-materialistic as you can get. I was just myself and somehow lucked out in finding a girl who was looking for that. I won't lie, I had some depressing encounters with women prior to meeting my wife. Never had a real date even until her. When I was 17, I had a girl walk into a restaurant, see me, and leave. I asked out a classmate in college and she said the dreaded, haha, ew, no. Plenty of stories. It was sad. Man, always hearing stories about people seeing someone and then just leaving is always sad to hear.
Doctors and nurses of Reddit who have delivered babies to mothers who clearly cheated on their husbands, what was that like? We had a very sweet, blonde-haired, blue-eyed mom and dad along with their entire extended family in the room for a delivery one busy afternoon at work. Think aunts, uncles, cousins, grandma, and grandpa too. The baby's born, and as the doctor places her on the mom's chest, the first words out of her mouth are, "That's not my baby! That's not my baby!" The baby in question, still attached at the umbilical cord, has beautiful, dark, curly black hair and dark skin. The nurse looks at her and tells her that this is definitely her baby because she's still attached to you. And she, not so quietly, tells the nurse, "There's no way! I never slept with a black man. It's not mine." The father is standing there silent, not sure what to do. A long, awkward silence fills the room. We clean her and the baby up as cheerfully as we can. We see the extended family filter out of the room and the father leaves to get a cigarette. About 10 minutes later, a tall black guy walks up to our front desk asking how to get to the patient in question's room. Okay, I am a nurse, but this story isn't about a birth I witnessed, it was my own birth. And although my mother definitely didn't cheat, all the midwives were convinced she had. For background, my mother's white and got married young to another white guy. Actually forced to by my grandparents who were horrified since she was living in sin. Their relationship petered out and they separated, but remained very good friends. Then she met my father, a black man, and began a relationship with him. Mum was still married at the time. Neither her nor her husband were in a hurry to get divorced, and he became good friends with Mum's new partner, my dad. Mum got pregnant with me. Time moves along. She goes into labor and needs to head to the hospital. Dad was working and couldn't make it home in time to get her there. So, still being good friends with the husband, she rings him and he comes around to drive her to the hospital and decides to hang out until I'm born. After an hour or so, Dad arrives. He was freaking out a bit, so his best friend, who was another black guy, drove him because Dad didn't trust himself. They arrive at the hospital right as Mom is ready to deliver. The midwives come out to the waiting room and grab the husband to be there when the baby's born. They knew that my mom's technical husband had driven her there, so assumed that he was the father of the baby. Went and grabbed him and tried to drag him into the delivery room. He freaked out and yelled,
No, I'm not the father. I'm just the husband. The father's Aboriginal.
Dad and his friend pulled up into the car park as this is happening, and Dad leaps out of the car. Decides he needs to have a quick smoke to settle his nerves before coming in. His friend doesn't smoke, so he walks in ahead. Just then, the midwives come running back to the waiting room to grab the actual father and see the only black guy in there. Obviously him, right? So they take him and suit him up to bring him to delivery. For whatever reason, my dad's friend chose not to question this and just went along with it. The midwives reach the delivery room and shove him inside. Mom, legs in stirrups and at the pushing stage, goes absolutely ballistic.
Not that black guy. He's not the father. Go get the other one.
The midwives hustle my dad's friend out and return him to the waiting room to wait with the husband. My dad has finally come inside by now, and the midwives marched up to him and said something like, I hope you're the father this time, otherwise I'm just going to give up and she can give birth alone. So that's the story about how the hospital went through 3 different men before they actually found my father. Consulted a couple who were expecting a baby and were confused about how she had chlamydia. Again, turns out they both had chlamydia. Both got treated and continued doing their thing. She could not get her head around how she had it again if he was the only guy she had slept with. He just looked very sheepish as I tried to subtly explain maybe he had caught it from elsewhere and passed it on. Took a long time for the penny to drop. One of those couples where you realize the kid won't get any help with their science homework from their parents. I know a guy who's fully white. His parents are both white, and his younger sister's black. I always assumed she was adopted, and one day I mentioned it. He looked at me weirdly and was like, no dude, that's my full-blood sister. Obviously, I didn't believe it, and neither did his dad at the birth. But they got the paternity test and she was his daughter. Likelihood is they've got some black ancestors far enough back to be forgotten about. I also know a dude who has a white Scottish mom and a black Jamaican dad. Dude came out pale white with a ginger afro. Genetics were not on his side. Anesthesiologist here. C-sections are typically done under spinal anesthesia, and we're the ones at the head of the table keeping the mother calm and talking her through the procedure while the surgeons operate. I've seen it more than once, but I remember one in particular where the parents were both very Caucasian and the baby was very much not. The father obviously had to be very dark-skinned. At delivery, when the not father saw the baby, he just looked down at his wife, who started to cry and calmly called her some horrible names and walked out. She started screaming for him to come back, but there wasn't much she could do since she was, still being operated on. She lost it to the point I eventually had to sedate her just a bit because she was in danger of injuring herself. As far as I know, her husband never came back to the hospital. I don't know what happened after that. A friend of mine tells the story of his aunt giving birth in the 70s or 80s to a baby that at first glance appeared to be of Asian descent. Aunt and her husband are both Caucasian Midwesterners from long lines of the same sort, going back to Germany. There was evidently a shocked moment, and then the aunt's father, my friend's grandfather, quipped,
Well, they say 1 in 7 babies is born Chinese.
And everyone laughed. The tension broke, long enough for the doctor, also a white Midwesterner of German stock, said that likely the kid's color is just off due to the events of the birth. The baby is now a man in his 30s or 40s and looks like your typical Midwesterner. He just had some tinge to his skin for a few hours following the birth, plus some dark hair at birth that has since lightened up. I had a case where the newborn had chlamydia. Got it from the mom, obviously. So the mom admits that she was cheating on the dad, because there's no way to explain that one. Except the dad was cheating too, with the other guy's girlfriend. And all 4 of them had chlamydia and no idea who had it first. They also had no idea who the actual dad was. That was a rodeo. My brother had a surprise baby this way. He and a coworker had a one-night stand while she was broken up with her ex. She gets back with her ex, ends up pregnant. Flash forward to the delivery day. The day my brother sends me a picture of a random baby out of the blue and says, I think I'm a dad. She's white, her boyfriend is black, my brother is white. Baby came out looking very, very white. I don't know how it went down in the hospital room, but I know they separated very soon after. My brother went to visit her in the hospital and asked if she would let him take a paternity test. She agreed and it came back positive a week later. And that's how I got my surprise nephew. I'm of Irish descent, extremely pale, freckled, wavy dark hair, and darker green eyes. My husband is half Native American, half German, dark hair, and slightly wavy as well. My daughter came out with light brown curly hair and ever so slight strawberry blonde pieces mixed throughout. Curls for days. And the nurse goes, wow, where did you get that hair? Knowing I had similar color as a baby and my mother has kinky curly hair, my husband in a room full of nurses goes, I don't know, poster, where did she get that hair? I could have killed him. Not a nurse, but my wife is, and I hear everything. A woman was delivering her white ex-husband's baby with her new black boyfriend beside her. And after the baby came out and had his foot stamped with the ink pad, the boyfriend pointed to the black foot and said, aw, he's got my feet. I guess it's off topic, but I laughed when she told me. My brother married a half Korean, half white woman who had 3 girls to the same Mexican guy. The first looks Latina. The second looks Pacific Islander. The third girl has platinum blonde hair and icy blue eyes. They look nothing alike, and yet if you look at their lineage, it all makes sense. I don't know if this ever caused any issues between her and her ex, but I could understand if an eyebrow was raised in the third one. Now she is a 4th girl with my brother, and she looks nothing like the other 3. Just standard brown hair, brown-eyed white girl. Not a delivery nurse, but I have to share. My friend Sarah was pregnant and her boyfriend flaked out and was not in the picture. So her other friend Eric and I took it upon ourselves to be there for her during the pregnancy. When she was having an ultrasound, we were both there in the room with her. As the tech is showing us the baby's face, we're saying things like, dude, that's totally your nose. Look, that can't be my chin, and things like that. Sarah was laughing and the bewildered tech was looking at the 3 of us, probably making comparisons herself. I ended up working with that tech years later. One day she said, so, out of curiosity, who was the father? I'm a nurse. I've seen quite a few situations where dad turns out not to be dad, but never because of the color of the newborn. I have, however, seen an absolute ton of kids who are born and don't look like the same ethnicity as their parents for days, or sometimes a couple weeks. Babies often look darker when they're born. Just saying, some of these anecdotal stories might not necessarily be true. I had a female patient come in with abdominal pain. Pregnancy test was positive. She was with her husband who evidently had a vasectomy about a year prior. I slowly backed out of the room after that one. I know it's possible, just improbable. Obligatory, not a doctor or nurse, but both my parents have blonde hair, and when I was born, my hair was strawberry blonde. My paternal grandparents lost their heads and accused my mom of cheating because red-tinted hair didn't run in their family. However, it ran in my mom's family with a redhead popping up every now and then. My paternal grandparents didn't know that. They just really hated my mom, so looked for excuses to drag her down. It wasn't until I stopped looking like a potato, as most newborns do, and started looking like a person when my dad's family features came through enough to make them apologize to my mom. A friend of mine, white guy, never knew who his father was, got married and had a kid with a white girl. Kid came out black, so he opted for a paternity test rather than walking away, and it was indeed his son. So he took a genetics test a couple years later and it turns out he's half African. Had a patient come into the ER for a UTI with her boyfriend of 3 months. His words. She was 19, acting extremely dramatic for just having a UTI. We tell her we need urine. She urges us to cath her, which is really unusual, but says she can't pee. So me and another nurse assume the position to put in a catheter with her lying on the gurney. At this point, the nurse screams, "Call L&D, she's crowning!" L&D nurse gets in just in time to grab the child as it shoots out into her hands and is a living, breathing baby. The girl swears she had no idea she was pregnant. They wheel her off to postpartum and the guy is just kind of left standing there, dumbstruck.
We've only been dating for 4 months. I had no idea she was pregnant. She never mentioned it at all.
All with his head just buried in his knees while he was sitting on the floor against the hallway wall. I felt so bad for the guy. Okay, so story from a friend of my brother's. She worked as a nurse and a woman and her husband came in. They were both white, and she's delivering a child that was black. The husband immediately starts saying WTF, while she's going on and on about dormant traits and everything. He orders a DNA test. While this is going on, her mother and stepdad show up. The stepdad is black. After the testing is done, the DNA test ends up showing that the baby is the stepdad's. Her husband instantly dropped her and cut ties. It's sometimes best not to leap to conclusions too quickly. When I was born, my skin was a little blue. Thankfully, my dad didn't get angry and accuse my mom of screwing around with a Smurf. Not a doctor or nurse, but in undergrad I had a buddy, Caucasian, who'd been dating the same girl, also Caucasian, for quite a while. She gets pregnant and he proposes. Fast forward a few months and both families are eagerly waiting at the hospital to greet the baby. The baby comes out black. Everyone's in shock. Girls frantically trying to convince everyone that there's been a misunderstanding. My buddy calls off the engagement immediately, returned the ring, and never looked back. Not a doctor or nurse, but when I was 14, maybe 15, I found out my cousin and his wife were having a baby. Keep in mind, my mom had lots of much older siblings, so my cousin was already 23 at this point. Fast forward 8 months later, me, mom, and the rest of our extended family are eagerly waiting outside the delivery room, and we hear a scream. Not my cousin's wife, but my cousin. The nurse opens the door for us, and we see my cousin sitting on a chair, his head in his hands. His wife is holding their baby in her hands, but the only thing was, the baby was black. Needless to say, they divorced a month later and we've not heard from her since. Med student here. Had a mother who was A negative and a father who was A negative, but baby ended up being A positive. Mother was asking if it was possible for this to happen and the doctor kind of implied that it was possible. To my surprise, since it's not meant to be. But they suggested to retest the husband's blood group and to follow up with their general practitioner. The doctor told me after that they didn't want to get involved and would leave it up to the general practitioner to deal with and just hope the husband was actually positive. Apparently things got awkward the next day. They stayed for a couple of days after due to complications when the husband was asking about blood grouping and was just strongly suggested to get retested. I never found out what happened after, but from my impression of the mother and some of the things she said, I'm pretty sure she cheated. My wife's best friend is a doctor who delivers babies, so I have a couple of stories for you. She delivered one baby where the father and mother were acting really awkward, but he was around during labor, and when it came time to push, the man just walked out and left the room. Apparently, the issue was they were just friends, and he lived in another state with his wife and kids. Another woman had an affair with her cousin's husband and got pregnant, calling him her fiancé. Her husband died during this period and it prompted her to go out and sleep with a few other one-night stands. At this point, she was exploring other alternatives but was turned away because she was overweight and hypertensive, making the procedure too risky. She never followed up with the doctor and gained weight to over 400 pounds. It was too late for any other options at this point, and she'd been taking medication for the hypertensive thing, and the medication can cause death or deformities. When she delivered, it took the entire staff to prevent her from having a stroke. And the baby's kidneys, do they work? No one knows. Most of the stories are that the man cheated. If the mother cheats, there's no real reason to bring it up, so they don't really know. Lots of telling a mother who has only slept with one man that she and her baby have chlamydia. No weird stories of white babies to black parents or vice versa. I had a friend who was a nurse tell me this story. A birth of a couple's third child. The couple was white. The baby was obviously of Pacific Islander descent. Everyone went very quiet. The nurse telling me the story said she took a moment of silence as she realized what had happened. Then she tried to act normally, but waiting for the outburst. She said the tension was unreal. The guy stared for a minute at the child that was obviously not his. The mom was already in tears and talking very fast. The guy stood up, looked around for a minute, then left the room. Never said a word. He wasn't seen again at the hospital. The mom spent the rest of the day on her phone. The nurse doesn't think she ever found him. I got a weird one. My previous neighbor was a nurse and delivered one where my buddy of mine was involved. A buddy of mine she knew came in with his girlfriend who was in labor. My buddy was clearly not keen on having a kid, but the mother wanted to go through with it and was madly in love with my buddy to a point that it was obsession. So the girlfriend decided to keep it in order to keep him around. The girlfriend was properly paranoid, delusional, and an abusive head case that made my buddy's life hell for 18 months. He was at the point where I genuinely thought he might just just run away or slip into depression because of this woman. She insisted it was his and was expecting him to either marry her or, in her words to one of my mutual friends, "If he won't love me, I'll just take him for all his money for the next 18 years. My neighbor said he looked like death in the waiting room while the baby was being delivered. The baby comes out, my buddy and the girl, who are both English-Irish heritage, looked and saw a Pacific Islander baby. Turns out the girlfriend was sleeping with one of the local rugby players on the down low, and he ended up knocking her up. My neighbor said she had never seen someone who looked so emotionally and mentally broken do such a 180 in less than a minute. My neighbor looked back at him as he walked out of the room laughing maniacally with joy. He looked at my neighbor and said, "That's not mine. Thank heck, I'm free." She said he was spotted dancing down the hallway to the exit. My buddy's doing okay now. He has a very nice South African girlfriend who he's been with for 3 years. They're looking to buy a house together and get married soon. His ex is now living with her parents in a small granny shack with the kid. The Pacific Islander baby daddy went MIA, and last I heard is suspected to be hiding out on some island in his native Fiji. Can't blame the guy for leaving, and I personally hope he's never found. Hospital social worker here. I met with a family because their baby was in the ICU for inhaling his monicum during birth, and we met with all NICU families for support. The father asked me in front of their 5 other children who were old enough to understand the question, how to get a paternity test. Awkward. I don't know about the delivery part necessarily, but the birth certificate part can be awkward. In Louisiana, if you're married or have been divorced for less than 300 days, the husband/ex-husband goes on the birth certificate unless there's a DNA test proving who the father is with a form signed by the mother, the husband, and the actual father. Many divorced women don't realize that and have a baby with someone else. It's a shock to find out legally, your ex-husband is still the baby's father unless you get all that other stuff sorted. Midwife from Australia here. Craziest delivery I ever attended was a girl who was pregnant 17 times with 15 live children as a result of those pregnancies. And 3 different dads turned up over the short course of her labor with baby number 15. They proceeded to have a fist fight about who was the real father, and I had to call security to escort them out. That followed with a call to child services. My wife is a nurse. One day, she had a woman come in complaining of abdominal pain. They quickly find out she's pregnant and in labor. Her wife arrives shortly after with a lot of questions. This is my granddad's story. He was a gyno. It must have been in the 70s when a married white couple came into the hospital with a woman in labor. Baby's born, my granddad is called to cut the cord. But the baby's all gray. The nurse is in terror and holds the baby upside down and smacks it on the butt, as was custom to clear the airways, and is almost in tears. "Doctor, the baby's only getting darker and darker. I don't think it's getting enough oxygen." My granddad, having worked in the field for a long time at that point, just started smiling, took the baby and said, "I think a good bath will do just fine," and proceeded to wash all the blood and fluids from birth off the baby, revealing a healthy and half-black child. He used to tell that story all the time when I was a kid. He said the husband just stormed out and it was a huge scandal in their village. Since it was Germany in the 70s in a rural area, there weren't that many candidates for the father either. Well, somehow, I don't know why, the husbands are almost always first aggressive towards the doctor or nurse who presents the baby. Had a case I'll always remember. My first shift in gynecology. Late night, around 11 p.m. A woman comes in, screaming and cursing like there's no tomorrow. We check her and she's around 7 centimeters dilated. At 10, you can start the birth. We rush her to the birth room. Father's being led into the waiting room, which is also a library for new fathers. A lot of books with information on firstborns and things like that. Fast forward. Woman gives birth. She goes to the recuperating room. Husband goes to her, both eagerly awaiting for the baby to be presented. My boss, who's one sadistic guy, hands me the baby and tells me to go present it. Did I forget to mention that the baby was black? Oh, and the mother was a snow white skinned redhead, and the father, well, blue eyes and blonde hair. There was absolutely no way that I could justify that amount of meddling. I bite the bullet, take the little lad, and head off. I enter the room. The father's standing up. He sees that the baby is black. He looks at his wife, looks at the baby, looks at my face. My face tells him, yes, there's no mistake here. And he loses it. Weirdly enough, his anger's not focused on the wife, but on me and the baby, the two unlucky bastards who had nothing to do with with the betrayal or any of that. The husband starts throwing newspapers and books at me and the baby, shouting,
Get him away! That's a mistake!
not in a racist way or anything, just the man was in shock, and kept backing up towards the wall like a cornered animal trying to run away from a predator. In this case, he was just cornered by a dreadful fact, the one that he's not the father. Me and the baby managed to escape with just a bruise on my forehead. Bibles travel faster than any other books through air.
This is for Gen Z and millennials. How hard is it for you to buy a home? The only way I can afford a home at this point is if I buy raw land, harvest and process the trees on it, and build it myself. This is a dream for some people, but in the UK, land is expensive, and we have to buy/import most of our wood because wood foraging is illegal without a license, because of course it is. I can afford the month-to-month mortgage. I cannot, however, afford a down payment. My parents' house's mortgage is like half of the rent in my area. I can afford that, and probably most of the utilities and such by myself. That being said, the price of the house has almost tripled in value since they bought it. I could probably swing the down payment by myself, but it would definitely make me uncomfortable. I honestly feel like I need to get married just to get a house. Here's a detailed example. Wife and I bought our house in 1998 when our first child was born. The house sold for $105,000 and we put $10,000 down. We hadn't done anything major to the home and we cleaned it up in 2007 to secure a refinance to a lower interest rate and get cash to top off a remodel. Appraisal was $180,000. That's value growth fueled fully by the loss of so many independent home builders after the market crash. We brought the kitchen and bathrooms up to modern standards, stone countertops, new cabinets and fixtures, refurbished the wooden floors, added a door off the dining room and a large deck. We got the house appraised in 2021 for $290,000. 2 houses on our street sold for over $300,000 last year, and one of them was in rough shape. Banks here are requiring 30% down for new buyers right now. For my oldest son that is 2 years out of college, he would have to provide a down payment that is nearly as much as we bought the house for 25 years ago. For a 1,000 square foot home. Let that sink in. A lot of small construction company owners, the kind that would build small homes, went out of business or retired after the housing crash, and the industry hasn't recovered. This has caused a greater impact to those needing starter homes. Lower supplies means higher prices. On top of that, renting homes is a good source of passive income, so an industry of corporations built specifically to make money off of them and has grown like fungus on a rotting log in this nation. Home values are ridiculous, down payments are ridiculous, and corporate cash offers are desirable for sellers, making the first housing purchase a nightmare for many. Man, I relate to both of these comments so much. I honestly do feel like if I'm ever going to buy a house, I'm going to need a partner to do it. On top of that, I also hate the idea of renting. I understand why people do it, but I've never liked the idea of putting money into something that I will never own. So seeing the crazy amount of money you need for a down payment is soul crushing. Millennial here. All I had to do was marry a girl, buy her a car, help her get her license back, and turn her loose on the streets to get T-boned by a DoorDash driver. That DoorDash insurance payout was $1 million. Profit. Disclaimer, as of last week, I don't live in that house anymore, but that's another story. Wow, this story was basically I made my money the old-fashioned way. I got hit by a Lexus. I prefer a realistic dream, like going to Narnia through my closet. Just be grateful that you have a closet. I'm an old millennial in a nowhere state. Buying our home was insanely easy. They were giving them away. 2 months later, the national housing market began to crash. This was in 2007. We're still here with 13 years to go. I think if we were 25 today, starting over, it would be extremely tough. Kind of the same deal for me. Bought my first in 2009 when the market as a whole was its worst and at the worst time of year for sales to begin with. January closing at the end of February. I did some work to the place and stayed there to 2005 and sold it to make a little profit. The market was probably fair at this point, as it wasn't a buyer's market, but it wasn't a seller's market either. Then bought the house that I'm currently in, and since 2019, watched it double in value. Refinanced in 2021 at an extremely low rate. I honestly couldn't rent a decent apartment in my area right now for what my full payment is. Taxes and insurance included. Plus all utilities cost me a month, and to own a 2-bedroom, 2-bath with a yard and 2-car garage, it's messed up to think about it, but it will be paid off when I'm in my 40s to boot. But I literally can't afford to move at this point. It's sad that people who actually have houses right now can't even leave those houses if they wanted to because the market is so bad. Old millennial here. The only reason I own a house is because my mom and I went in together on a duplex. We decided that this financially made the most sense. She's getting older, so this way I can keep an eye on her too. I did the same thing with my mom back in 2010. We both have health issues that make it a good idea to have another grown-up in the house. Neither of us have a partner. It just made sense to stick together than sit miserably in each of our own tiny apartments. House is 2 floors, top floor is mine, bottom floor is hers, though we usually sit around in the downstairs living room where the computers are set up. It's crazy how many people have assumptions about people still living with their parents at a certain age, but I feel like if you have a family that you actually like, it might be the best option for some right now. I'm early career, just started really. I make $60,000 a year in Canada. I will never be able to afford a house in my lifetime just on this wage, or any wage that I'm likely to see in this field. My only chance is any inheritance I get, or shifting careers like I'm trying to do right now. It's awful and much harder than it should be, but in Edmonton you can find a decent house for about $160,000 to $190,000, which would be about $1,300 to $1,500 per month, including insurance and property tax. That's at 7.5% if you can make a 10% down payment. I know Edmonton is more affordable than other cities, but it's the only market I'm familiar with, and I think Calgary is about 5% more expensive. Just for informational purposes, I have no doubt many Canadian cities are out of reach for most everyone. In the Comox Valley, BC, where there is absolutely nothing but a dumb mountain and an army base, an old trailer in a park is now $270,000 plus. There's flippers everywhere, constantly building, and everything keeps getting more expensive here. It's hell. They don't realize that they've made it so that their kids will never be able to move out. Rooms in houses that morons who, for some reason apparently, thought housing was going to be banned or something, paid too much for their houses. Now they try to rent out single rooms here for more than a freaking Vancouver apartment, and they whine that they have to charge that because it has to be someone else's fault you bought something you can't afford. There are homeless people everywhere here. Wanna guess why? A trailer being over $270,000 sounds insane to me. It was super hard saving up. We aimed to buy a cheap place first and just get onto the ladder. At least that way we were building equity as opposed to paying rent. Average home is almost 7 figures and interest rates are approaching 8% in Canada. Unless you have a dual 6-figure income or live at home with a strong income, the odds of you affording a home near a job center is non-existent. Down payment has to be 20% for anything over $9,999. The cost of buying a home, interest and purchase price, is going up way faster than anyone can grow their actual income. We bought one in 2014 with an FHA loan. Only out-of-pocket cost was $500 for due diligence and around $2,000 for the lawyer. We've refinanced a few times and our mortgage will be about just under $1,300 later this year, when our taxes go up. Still cheaper than a 1-bedroom in a place where we won't get murdered. Not getting murdered is a huge selling point when I look for a home. I can't even rent a home. Same. I feel like I'm never going to be able to move past renting a room in a shared house. Elder millennial here. I bought in 2018. Had no cash in hand. Utilized a program from a lender for low/moderate income buyers. Not me. Or those buying in low/moderate income zones. That's me. Required only 5% down. Took a 401k loan for the down payment and closing costs. $160,000 Philly townhome. Mortgage payment even with MPI is less than the rent on my previous 2-bedroom apartment in the same neighborhood. Process was easy, but then again, I'm familiar with it working in banking for 15 plus years. I'd wager the biggest struggle of most millennials and Gen Z is the cash down for payment and closing. To that end, ask for low down payment programs from your lender and hope to God you have some of those money bag boomer relatives that can gift you some cash. Borrowed from my 401k and paid my down payment and closing about 10 years ago. At the time, my monthly was the same as rent I was paying. Today, it's much less. I had no idea what I was doing at the time. However, the 401k loan was really straightforward, and I had a good mortgage broker that helped me understanding a lot of the numbers. I had a younger millennial friend that did a first-time buyer home loan, and that seemed to work for them. I don't really like the idea of paying mortgage insurance, but they didn't have access to a loan. I got lucky with the market timing and had decent credit, and had good work history. I imagine it's a bit crazier/harder right now for people trying for the first time given the validity over the past few years. We kinda lucked into ours. We applied for a rural development loan through the USDA and qualified for $179,900 with a really good interest rate. We had to wait 6 months for it to process and couldn't find the right home in our budget. Then we stumbled upon a home that checked all of our boxes and was owned by a little old lady that just wanted to get it off her hands. Listed at $180,000, a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath on a quarter acre. Last I checked, it was estimated to be worth $430,000. Man, I hope one day that I'm in a position just to want to get a house off my hands. I often think I will never buy a home, and if I ever do, it won't be until I'm in my 40s or 50s. From UK here, born in 92, have a family, 2 kids, and a wife. Buying a house seems near impossible with your average income. Current money outgoing on rent/living kills any ability to save enough to get a down payment on the mortgage. I've come to accept that I'm 100% not buying a house anytime soon. It's not how it used to be. As my old man would say, life is a struggle. I always thought life was a highway. An apartment alone these days costs you no less than $1,800 a month. It's extremely difficult. Older millennial, 1983, my mom gave me a little money to make a down payment on a 430 square foot condo in SoCal for $270,000 with PMI. Her thinking was that the market was only going to go up. Of course, 2008 happened. The bottom fell out of the market and I got laid off. Somehow I managed to hold on, and after 10 years, finally had enough equity to make a little off the place. My wife and I used it to buy a much more comfortable place in PNW 5 years ago. There were some tough times for sure, but I'm lucky compared to a lot of people. We refinanced in 2020 for a super low rate. I don't know how anyone can afford a mortgage with today's rates. We've been in our house for 5.5 years. An FHA loan and 2 down payment assistance programs through the city got us into it for almost nothing out of pocket. I don't recall the exact numbers now, but we had to put down earnest money, pay inspection, and like $250 at closing. It was under $1,000 when it was all said and done. The problem was finding a house we could afford. We got lucky there, because my best friend has a friend who at the time was working for the city. After $1 million worth of grants to a developer, all he had to do was sell 1 home to a low-income family. My best friend had to make sure all his contacts knew what we were trying to do. So his best friend referred us and they sold us the house for what we could afford. It was just dumb luck, in other words. The house is still in the ghetto, but all the other houses we could afford weren't just in the worst parts of the city, but also falling down. Like for real. One of the houses we looked at was basically missing a floor in one of the rooms. So we consider it a win. I just bought a home. I needed a $50,000 down payment to do it. I won't go into details on how I got that $50,000, but I can damn sure guarantee the average millennial/Gen Z don't have $50K to drop. I'm in the process of buying a luxury cardboard box. Should only take me 45 years to pay it down, but then the sucker's all mine. It's genuinely not a realistic goal for some people who are making an average wage and not married or receive a down payment from a family member. It's genuinely hopeless for now, and I'm glad I'm not in the hunt. Just gotta hold out until all the boomers die off. After that, hopefully I can squeeze in somewhere. Boomers dying off isn't going to help if all their homes are swooped up by investors to turn into Airbnbs. Legislation needs to be passed to limit the amount of investment into residential properties for anything to change. This comment right here, I honestly do believe, in America at least, that laws need to be made to limit people from buying up all the property. I believe I read an article about my state that over 50% of homes bought in the last few years were from major companies to be turned into rental properties or Airbnbs. It's pretty disgusting. We bought a house priced just over $100,000 with an FHA loan. Granted, this was back in 2015 when much lower priced homes were easier to find. The total down payment was just under $4K. There were other costs as well, but probably more than $2K from what I remember. We absolutely would not be able to afford the 15 to 20% down payment at that time. No way. We had a little bit of money saved and some money gifted to us when we got married. The house was crappy, but we slowly made improvements over the years. It did end up paying off beyond our wildest dreams when we sold it in 2021 in the super crazy market, and we were able to upgrade substantially. 25-year-old here. Me and my girl live in SoCal where the prices are crazy. It might be another 3 to 5 years until we're able to buy. It's crazy that you guys actually have a trajectory at all. I'm a California native, and the housing has been unbelievable since before the whole nation got its crisis wake-up call over a year ago. I have a few friends that are native to LA and a few that moved there and left. They all say the same thing. It's expensive. My partner and I both make over 6 figures. We live in Seattle, Washington, and we had to look outside the county we both work in to find somewhere we could afford. Got 5% down payment by using our life savings and borrowing from the 401k. I still feel lucky to be an owner with a relatively good loan rate, but it sickens me to think how hard it must be for most, when for us, as a privileged couple, it felt like a risky stretch to get into a $500,000K starter home. 3-bed, 1-bath, built in 1962, with no improvements. Seattle is crazy because 10 years ago things were so cheap. People in tech only wanted to buy East Side or Seattle. Places like Renton and Balto were both considered poor or far. Now, these same places are 3x in price and are unaffordable, and even techies are looking farther and farther for affordable housing. I remember when old houses in Bellevue could have been had for $400,000, and Renton houses were like $200K. That was just about 10 years ago in 2013. Have you ever thought it would be cool to go to the moon and how technically it could happen, but you know in all reality you're never going to stand on the moon? It's similar to that. We bought our first house in 2016, and since then it's appreciated $200,000. If we didn't buy when we did, we would still be able to buy, but not nearly the size house we can afford today. Since my wife and I bought in 2012, our house has increased the value by 245%. The appreciation value is great, but I have no idea who could afford a house right now. My wife, 40 female, and I, 38 male, bought our first home last year. It took 20 years together of building credit, building careers, saving cash, and then borrowing $5K to round out our down payment. Oh, and we moved from central Texas to rural eastern New Mexico. Our new property is awesome though. We're thrilled. That is insane that you would have to up and leave your own state to obtain homeownership. What is even crazier is that they had to leave Texas. It only felt like a few years ago that Texas was affordable. I moved back with my grandparents, just started my career and work remote on $30K a year and should have a down payment relatively soon for anything less than $130K. I live in the Midwest and I'm looking for smaller houses that don't cost an average of $500,000. My wife and I bought our house in 2016. We live in the South and it is a 3-bedroom home for under $200K. So I know the likelihood of something like that nowadays is crazy. It wasn't too bad, saved for a year or so, and since we were first-time home buyers, there were lots of programs I qualified for that saved us money in the closing costs. The hardest part was we were moving states and didn't have jobs locked in yet, but we were able to get it pushed through. What bank approved a mortgage for a couple with no jobs? That loan officer must have been off their meds that day. You got extremely lucky on that. Very young millennial/early Gen Zer here. I got a condo for $150K in a decent location. Average per capita income is $51,000, 3% poverty rate. For some general metrics, built in 2021, it was a lot of hunting, and the house is a 2-bedroom, but everything is spacious. It's by no means a beautiful house, but it's not run down either. Down payment wasn't too bad for me. There was ways to incorporate it into the loan. I forgot what that phrase was though. I would need a bank clerk to mistakenly add at least 2, ideally 3, zeros to the end of my account total and never notice. Like ever. I tried the loan route and it wasn't impossible with what little I had. That's what the bank told me anyways. I had planned on buying a shell of a home from the Amish and building the rest myself on my parents' land, but an opportunity plopped into my lap a year ago. My house was built in the mid-late 1800s and has been abandoned for 8 to 10 years before I got there. The previous tenant was nearly 100 and couldn't make it upstairs anymore and went into assisted living. Her children are in their 70s and didn't feel like doing anything with it, so the town obtained ownership of it. It ended up selling for $20,000, and the taxes last year was like $280 for the house and an acre or so of land. I'm slowly repairing/rebuilding things every couple of months with whatever money I have saved up. I've fixed the plumbing, electrical, roof, and several other issues that have been taken care of since I started. The spring project is the root cellar and rebuilding the cellar door along with some gardening prep. I like my process, but it certainly wouldn't be for everyone. It was full of rodents, ticks, used substances, and looting debris before I got there. Luckily, the bones were in good shape besides a few things I had to replace. 3 or 4 full roll-off dumpster containers later, and it's starting to make the situation not as worse every single day. In popular areas, impossible. In the Midwest, it's not that bad. I can get a decent starter home in a decent city pretty cheap here. The only problem is, it's the Midwest. My wife and I may be able to afford a mortgage on the cheapest home we could find, but we have about $400 to $500 between the both of us right now and definitely don't have enough to make a down payment. We live paycheck to paycheck. Average houses where I live go for around $200K, so it's not completely unobtainable. I gave up on the idea of homeownership like 10 years ago. I bought a house a little over a year ago. I'm a 38-year-old millennial. My credit score was on the high side of average or the low side of good, 700-ish, which is a whole thing to get on its own, but I was lucky in a lot of ways. I was shopping for homes in the 100K range because I'm a cheapskate, but there wasn't any good ones anywhere I wanted to live, which included a lot of places, some of which were quite far apart. So I gave up and started looking for places to rent. Turns out places to rent are awfully expensive too, so I went back to the housing market with a higher budget. Found a nice 1920s craftsman style home that was on the market for about $165,000. Real estate agent told me to offer 10K above because the market is crazy, but I offered 5K over instead. Offer accepted, had them do the inspections, and the owners were super helpful in fixing the things the inspector cited. Went to the bank and they were real helpful until they weren't. They wouldn't accept my pay card from my work for down payment money because they just didn't vibe with that company. They wouldn't accept Credit Karma cards that I had my tax returns on. They wouldn't accept cash because maybe I was a bad evil drug dealer. My father is a family practice physician and he was able to front the money and I just ended up paying him, which I recognize to be a privilege hardly anyone has. Huge obstacle. Be forewarned, you might want to put your money in a nice boring bank well before you start buying, or the banks will invent some obstacles for you.
When have you seen the real world hit a spoiled brat? When the high school principal's daughter, who previously got away with all kinds of garbage behavior, vandalism, drinking, major bullying, got caught vandalizing a lecture hall in uni, she was unceremoniously dumped and banned. Parents whined for months on Facebook about their poor baby's unfair treatment and the fact that her applications to other unis were being denied. Spending $50 on food a day is not normal. College girl got cut off from her parents for drinking and not going to class and had to get a job. She put on Facebook about how she's gonna go hungry and needs money. People offered her food and to make her dinner. She said, "That's okay, I just need about $40 to get through the day. I don't like to grocery shop." If you're wondering how she went through that much a day, she always ate out at a restaurant and had Starbucks twice a day. Add in snacks and alcohol and there's $40 in one day. I was a school bus driver in the 70s, during height of court-ordered busing, so I ferried poor kids to the rich side of town, then rich kids the other way. Lots of entitled brats, but one stands out. Super entitled kid, constantly defying rules. Eventually I caught him with too many witnesses attempting to set a bus seat on fire with his lighter. School officials were called. Hearing with officials and rich dad, and he's banned from all buses for the rest of the semester. Dad offers to pay for the damage and quietly accepts the punishment. Then comes the surprise. Next morning when I arrive at 6 a.m. to clean my bus, regular task every morning, rich kid and dad are standing there. Dad introduces me to my new personal bus cleaner for the rest of the year. He brings the kid every morning and forces him to wash and clean the floors of my bus before taking him to school. By the end of the year, entitled kid is actually working hard and being friendly. We're getting along pretty well, and I help him out sometimes so he can get on to school. Kid turned out okay when all was said and done. Good move by dad. Back in engineering school, one of my classmates was the son of one of our professors. Now, this professor was a really nice dude. He paid attention to his students, his classes were fun, and he rarely failed anyone. His son, on the other hand, was a total jerk. Rude and nasty, and would always brag about how his dad was a highly senior professor with tenure.
"You know who my dad is, right?"
was literally his catchphrase. He wasn't even a good student. We ranked GPAs out of 10, and he was a 4. This professor actually taught a very specialized course, so we only had about 2 courses from him in our entire time at the school. This course in our 5th semester was a bit complicated. If you didn't do regular study, it was easy to fail, but if you practiced the stuff, passing was a breeze. So finals come around and Jerkface is out there bragging that he didn't need to study because his dad will pass him anyway. He took his confidence all the way to the exam hall. And then the results were out. He had scored 7 out of 100. We know because the professor called us all to the classroom and displayed his answer sheet on the projector. According to him, he was the 3rd student who had failed in his 20-year teaching career. And he couldn't be more disappointed that it was his son. The amount of verbal butt-whooping Jerkface received was enough to have him quivering like a wet cat in front of everyone. The next time he pulled the "Do you know who my dad is?" card, the standard answer he received was, "The one who failed you." He pretty soon stopped after that. He retook the exam the following year, failed again, and had to drop out. Wherever he is today, I hope he learned his lesson. When I was working at a public library, we had a few local celebrities come in from time to time. Most of them were nice, but one had a real stick up his butt. He would complain about having to stand in line, about late fees, and about everything else. We would just say, sorry, those are the rules, or thank you for being patient, even though he wasn't. One day, he and I were apparently both having a bad day, and when I told him there was a limit on how many DVDs or video games he could check out at a time, he slammed his hands down on the desk and raged.
Do you know who I am?
This is a grown man, mind you. I was a little college student who barely looked old enough to drive. I was sick of his low-key bullying, so I just looked at him and said, yes, I do, Mr. X, and the rules still apply to you. Which of these would you like me to put back? He was stunned. I don't think anyone had ever actually told him that the rules for everyone else did in fact apply to him as well. He was a little nicer after that. Not a lot nicer, but still. Video of a drunk college kid yelling at the cafeteria manager because he wanted bacon jalapeno mac and cheese. He hurls verbal abuse, pushes the manager, gets taken to the ground, and realizes his mistake when the cops show up. Him saying, "I'm so screwed," while being cuffed is super satisfying. When my brother was in school, he was horrifically bullied for being autistic, and his bully was the most entitled little brat I've ever had the displeasure of meeting. His father paid for boxing practice, karate lessons, and other martial arts. This made him think that he was the best at anything physical. My brother isn't overly fond of sports and prefers to read in the library. As the typical nerdy kid, he's a prime target for bullies. One day when the bully had cornered my brother up against a wall, my brother finally decided he wasn't just going to take it anymore. But he strongly dislikes violence and thus would not be fighting back. Instead, when my bully tried to punch him, my brother ducked. 3 broken fingers and a trip to the hospital later, the bully's father finds out what's been happening. All his extra classes and training were cancelled. He had all of his electronics and games sold, and if he wanted to have a car, he would have to work for every penny himself. A kid in college was a roommate of mine. He was always bratty and spoiled, but hung out with us as if he were a good friend, and we let him chill with us because sometimes he wasn't bad. Then one day we heard him arguing with his mom on the phone that he needed more money. From the ensuing argument, we learned that he had, in less than 1 year, burned through 30 grand that his parents had given him for food and discretionary spending. Mind you, he was not paying for tuition, or lodging, or his car with this money. It was basically just food money, as all those other things were already covered by his parents. He was calling his mother some really nasty things and hung up on her. Then his father called and they got in an argument, cussing each other out. At the end of that call, he threw his iPhone at the wall and shattered it. This was the original iPhone. Turns out they cut him off, and he basically had to drop out of school and drive back home out of state because he couldn't afford to do anything anymore, and of course was too good to work a plebs job. He added me on Facebook about a year later and was a late blooming 9/11 truther. Obama was president by this time, and the only thing I ever said to him on Facebook was a simple reply correcting one fact that he was wrong about in his 9/11 conspiracy theory. He then posted 4 replies in quick succession telling me to open my eyes and then blocked me. Seems like maybe he didn't learn his lesson. Simple and pure example for my part. There was only one coffee shop on my campus, operating out of the library building, and it was always crowded. So you pretty quickly learned that if you wanted coffee before class, you got there 20 minutes early, grabbed a newspaper, I'm old, sue me, and took your time. It was always funny watching incoming freshmen crowd the line 5 minutes before their 8 a.m. and slowly filter out in despair as they realized there was absolutely no way that they were reaching that sweet Sumatra nirvana in time. Cue this little freshman girl, dressed in classic campus t-shirt, jean shorts, blonde ponytail coming out of the ball cap starter pack, walking up, assessing the line stretching out the door, and boldly deciding to just sorta skip it. Now, the baristas were usually pretty cool with people skipping for simple things, dropping down a quarter for some Scantrons or $1 for a cookie, anything that didn't require interaction. Not this girl. She caught the barista's attention while the previous customer was still paying, and went, "Hi, yeah, can I get a latte please? Like, really quickly?" The line starts back there," replied the now slightly confused girl behind the counter. "But I have class," whined the freshman. There was an awkward pause before the barista responded, "You're on a college campus. Are you freaking serious? Why do you think all these people are here? Back of the line." "Oh," was the only thing the freshman girl thought to say. As she turned to look at a line full of people staring daggers back at her, she looked not upset or embarrassed, but sort of enraptured with this newfound understanding that she's just been imparted. It's like for the first time in her life, she realized that other people were in her way for reasons. It was actually kind of beautiful to watch, like a baby deer learning to walk for the first time. Better late than never. One of my favorite things about the military is that in a uniform, nobody can tell how privileged or unprivileged you might have been. It's a total blank slate, and for many, it's humbling to not get to / have to wear your social status on your sleeve. On my second ship, there was an E2 who grew up very wealthy and was a jerk about it. He wasn't afraid to let us know. He thought that he was better than his peers. There's a stereotype of the enlisted guy who thinks of himself as an officer, as a way to pretend that means anything. That's this guy in every way. And he would try to get out of crappy enlisted work because he was going to be an officer, probably even a commanding officer of a ship. So there we were, a few hours into his first deployment, and this jerk gets violently seasick. It lasted for days. I don't know if you've ever been around someone who can't open their eyes without yakking, but it's awful. You really feel bad for them. It's hard to watch someone go through. Not with this guy. I'll admit that I was a bit spoiled growing up, though I didn't think I was a brat. My mom had a maid that came in several times a week. When I went to college, several things were very different for me. I knew how to clean up after myself, but cleaning a bathroom was completely new. The biggest shock was laundry. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing or how. I knew I was supposed to use detergent and softener, but I thought any soap would do, and didn't know what softener was. I had no idea how or when to add them either. Reality hit when a campus security guard came in and I asked how much of the dish soap I was supposed to use, and the man started laughing. He did help me get the right soap after and explained how to operate a washer dryer. I used to repair trails for the Forest Service, and I wouldn't call anybody a brat necessarily, but we're all pretty spoiled when it comes to manual labor and sleeping on the ground. On day 1, the bush plane flies the crew out to a grass airstrip about 40 miles east of town. Then you shoulder your pack, grab an axe and a shovel, and start hiking up the canyon, usually in the rain. Until you watch that plane disappear over the ridge, it's hard to imagine what you've signed up for. Hard labor all day, every day. Working, cooking, and camping in the rain that whole first month. No phone, no mail, no roof. And if you forgot something, you'll just have to live without it until the road opens in July. Wolves and mountain lions circle the camp at night. Sometimes bears come for your food. Everybody struggles for the first month. You'd see the kid who'd been the hard guy on his high school football team start to sit through lunch with his head in his hands just licked. Guys who are in the 1,000-pound club at their gym slumped up against a tree all evening, eating peanut butter for dinner because they were too beat to cook. Demanding as the job was, it wasn't really a physical issue. The best workers on the crew were hippie Jesus types with noodle arms who read Marcus Aurelius around the campfire at night. They just took everything as it came because no matter what, it just kept coming. Them and the Mormon ranch kids. I don't know how those kids came up, but nothing brought them down. In high school, one guy was a real jerk to everyone, and he had no sense of anyone but himself, and everyone kissed his butt because he was not only valedictorian of his class, but also star football, basketball, tennis, and track star. He was top dog for all the extracurriculars as well. He made my best friend cry multiple times just being a jerk towards her, and she had the unfortunate luck of being in his grade. He was also known as a player, just dating whoever he felt was hot enough for him, but would also put out for him. He honestly thought that nothing bad could ever happen to him because he was just that special. He graduated high school and went to his school of choice and immediately came out as gay on social media. Not long after that, he got his first boyfriend. Before the semester was even finished, his boyfriend cheated on him and he flunked out of his college and ended up having to go to another school. Last time I saw him, he was super polite and seemed to be rather humbled by his experience outside of our tiny town. I was out at a farm with my cousins for a party. It was more like an afternoon barbecue with all the parents sat talking and cooking while the kids ran around playing. Usual lazy afternoon in Africa. So anyway, I was 16 at the time, making me the oldest of the kids, and I'll admit that I was all back of the bus, too cool for school type of cringy teenager, and was practicing my casual aloofness. Now, there was this German couple there with this absolute monster child of 5 years old who made it his mission to terrorize all the other kids. The parents of this little Adolf sat beaming with delight watching their little ray of sunshine play with other children. Eventually, it became apparent that they were not going to do anything about it, and my parents told me to keep my cool and just ignore him, which I did because I didn't want to put my parents in an awkward situation. At some point in the afternoon, the kid found one of those plastic toddler toys. You know, the ones where they can sit on it and push themselves around, but it also has a handle at the back that toddlers can use as a walker. So he finds this toy and is running around the lawn full speed, ramming all the other kids. Now, I did tell him nicely that it was not good to hurt the other little boys and girls, but he just straight up ignored me and carried on with his game, giggling and chasing the other kids. He also decided that I was now fair game and I got rammed in the ankles and Achilles tendon a few times, and I'm fuming. His parents were watching and laughing the whole time. Eventually, I'm done with this little jerk, so I position myself in front of this small ditch, only about a quarter-inch deep and full of grass, and pull out my phone pretending to read messages. I was making myself an easy target for the little brat. He comes charging up behind me, aiming for my heels again. The front wheels go into the little ditch, stomping the walker. The kid was pushing it so fast that his momentum carried him right over the handlebars, right over the push toy, and past me, face planting into the dirt, going full scorpion. There was no blood, but he lay there screaming. The best part was that the parents watched the whole thing take place, and they and the other parents never suspected that I stood in that exact spot for that exact reason. His parents were kind of peeved that the kid hurt himself while I was watching the kids, but they couldn't say anything, so they just kept the boy close the rest of the day. So this story isn't about a child. This was a full-grown woman, maybe mid-30s, who very clearly was handed everything in life. Spoiled, selfish, entitled, whatever you want to call it, she was way out of touch with reality. So I grew up in a very nice upper middle class area with nothing but houses for miles around. At the center is a small block with a little grocery store, a few boutiques, restaurants, and a drugstore. It being the only shopping center anywhere around tends to attract really snobby people. Anyway, I was maybe 14 or 15 and went to the drugstore to grab something or other and happened to wander past the makeup aisle. This drugstore is pretty large, so their makeup selection is huge, with every brand you can think of taking up one whole wall of the building. I had just rounded the corner where I saw this woman sitting on the ground just as I saw the manager coming around the opposite corner, making a beeline for her like a bulldog. He stops, arms crossed, and the following happens.
Ma'am, I hope you know you're going to have to pay for those.
What?
The makeup. All of these packages you've opened. You're going to have to pay for them.
He gestured about towards where I was standing, still at the end of the aisle. I looked down to my right and saw what he was pointing at, the pressed powder compacts. She'd opened one of each shade, ranging from ivory to warm beige, and left the remains in piles at the bottom of each display. That's right, I said each. She went through every single brand and opened the packaged components. And to make it worse, each brand usually makes more than one type of pressed powder. There had to have been at least 40 of them. Her, agitated, "What do you mean? I don't understand. Why do I have to pay for them when I only need one?" Him, having a stroke,
"Because you've destroyed them. And because you've used them. We can no longer sell those to anyone else because they've been contaminated by you."
Her, becoming irate, "Well, I needed to test them to match my skin tone." It was at this point I realized that next to all the compacts were the used makeup sponges that come with them, as well as what appeared to be used baby wipes. Him, with an impending aneurysm,
"Well, I hope it was worth all the money you now owe us."
This was about 15 years ago, so the remainder of the conversation is fuzzy. I know she was panic crying and was refusing to pay, and he was threatening to call the cops. But I had to leave at that point, so I didn't get to see the outcome. But I do know that I did a little math when I got home. Nowadays, one of those compacts will cost about $10 each, but back then I'd say 5 to 6. So she had to pay at least $240 at the end of that. My friend is this entitled younger brother who acts like the world revolves around him. While his dad is stern with him, his mom babies this behavior and he can get away scot-free with almost anything. He gets angry very easily, and even at the slightest things. I was over at my friend's house, and while we were downstairs, we heard a loud crash from his brother's room. It turns out he was playing Fortnite on his TV and threw the controller into the glass table, which shattered. My friend called me later in the day over Discord and told me how after his dad came back, he grounded his brother for a month, and he wasn't allowed to play video games or go over to a friend's house. He had to pay for a new table with his allowance and had to do chores. He got what he deserved. Went on a double date with my boyfriend, his friend, and his friend's date. The whole evening she was rude, snobby, and overall a demanding person that felt entitled to whatever she wanted. She was rude to the waitstaff and suggested we tip them nothing for refusing to refund her order after she ate the whole thing and complained about everything. On the car ride back, she started driving, then halfway through the drive announced she didn't want to drive anymore. The rest of us had been drinking, so we all refused to take over. She said, "Fine, but I'm not driving either." Let go of the steering wheel and slammed on the brakes. We got rear-ended and it was her car, so no cost to the rest of us. But it was instant karma for her behavior and attitude. When I was in high school, there was this horribly bratty rich kid who loved to pick on others, push people around, and play the "do you know who my dad is" card a lot. Let's call him Todd. I hated this kid all through school. Final year of high school, I'd had a bad day one day, and it obviously showed. Todd sees me walking in the hall and makes some snide remark about my shirt. I promptly tell him to shove it as I'm not in the mood. He walks over to me while I'm at my locker and slams my locker door and shoves me. I recall that he said something else, but I honestly don't remember what it was. I just remember that I saw red and drove my fist into his nose like a truck. I stomped away all teenage and angsty. Got called to the office the next day. Todd is sitting there with his father and the principal. I knew I was screwed. The principal shows us all the security camera footage of what went down. I'm assuming an expulsion is coming my way when Todd's father puts his hand on my shoulder and smiles. He tells Todd to say thank you, and we both look at him dumbfounded. "Why would I say thank you? He broke my nose," says Todd. And his father responds with, "Because if I had been there and seen you act like that, I'd have killed you." He stood up and left, and I was excused to return to class. Todd never bothered me again. My former roommate's sister got slapped pretty hard. She knew absolutely nothing of the real world. Couldn't do laundry, cook food, clean, nothing. Her mom paid her share of the rent and she didn't even have to work while she was going to college and staying under our roof. She had the perfect setup. She was so dense, she kept her social security card in her wallet and it was stolen the first day she moved to the big city, even though she was warned. But oh, she knew better. Later on, she decided she didn't like living with us and our rules, such as you can't let your friends live in our apartment. It's against the lease. If your friends are gonna come over and make a big mess and eat all the food in the house that we pay for, we need compensation. We're fresh from college, low-income wage earners at the time. We can't afford it. And she needed to be respectful of quiet hours and clean up after herself. So she decided to make her daddy move her out so she could move in with a diagnosed schizophrenic who refused to take her meds and was a hoarder. Her mother and father said, "If you move out, we won't support you." She did it anyway. Oh, how she complained and moaned. "I had to get a job at Burgerville. The people there stole my paycheck from my wallet because I kept all of my paycheck in cash in it. We can't afford internet. It's so expensive. Food is so expensive." Well, she ended up quitting school and moving back in with her mom. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.